And we're going to begin with President Kaler and some important introductions.
Here we go. Chair McMillan, members of the board, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the new Vice President for University Services, Mike Bertelsen. Mike, would you please join me at the podium? Excuse me. The Vice President for University Services is a senior leadership position reporting directly to and serves at the pleasure of the Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations. As Vice President for University Services, Mr. Bertelsen provides leadership and oversight for 6 key units of operations supporting the university system: auxiliary services, capital planning and project management, facilities management, public safety, and university health and safety. In this role, he partners with the university's academic leadership to understand the needs of the academic enterprise, ensuring the necessary services and facilities. Mike has been with the University of Minnesota for 24 years, and for more than a year has served as the interim Vice President for University Services and demonstrated, as always, his strategic, administrative, and relationship building abilities, his highly effective customer service focus, and his deep knowledge of our operations. Of course, Mike's loyalty to our university is unmatched. Mike, congratulations. Please say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say thank you for the trust to lead University Services. I'm very proud of the 3,500 people who make up the organization. They don't always get the headlines, maybe of athletics or the kind of be in front of the faculty, but they work every day putting a great effort to make the university a safe, welcoming, and reliable place. And I look forward to working with all of you and the board and all of them to make the university better every day. So thank you.
Program here.
Chair McMillan and members of the board, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the new Vice President for Research, Dr. Alan S. Levine. Al, please join me at the podium. For just about everyone throughout our system, and even around the state, Al is a person, a leader, and a scholar who really needs no introduction. But here we go anyways. Beginning in January of 2017, Dr. Levine held the position of interim head of our Office for Research, the nation's 8th most active in terms of expenditures among public research universities. In October, his interim tag was removed, and as always, he's demonstrated his great wisdom, collegiality, and devotion to the university's excellence. Dr. Levine has been connected to the University of Minnesota since 1970 when he arrived on campus as a graduate student. He has served as a professor in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition, an adjunct in the Department of Psychiatry, and most notably as Dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences, where his statewide outreach was respected. He was also Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs. Our critically important research enterprise is in good hands with Dr. Levine, who will now write one more chapter in his remarkable career of leadership here at the U. Al, congratulations. Please say a few words.
I've always loved and been passionate about research, all aspects, both basic and applied, particularly the serendipitous findings that I've had in my laboratory and seen in other people's labs over the years. I appreciate the confidence that the President, the board, and my colleagues have placed in me in helping assist in running the R part of our R1 University. Thanks so much. Steve.
Now turn the podium to Chancellor Black for an introduction.
Thank you, President Kaler. Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Case, UMD's new Dean of our renowned School of Fine Arts. Bob joined us last June, and it was a homecoming of sorts for him since he received his undergraduate degree at UMD in the 1970s. He went on to earn a master's from the University of North Texas and a doctorate in music from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. Formerly, he served as chair of the music department and professor of music at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and most recently as dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of St. Francis in Joliet, Illinois. Bob is an accomplished trumpet player who has performed for more than 200 recording projects, including a Grammy-nominated CD. He has performed for movie soundtracks, commercial jingles, and Broadway musicals. As a studio artist, he has performed with legends such as Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peggy Lee, Lena Horne, and many others. In addition to being a performer, Bob is also a composer and conductor, and we are very happy to have him bring his perspective as a working artist to our School of Fine Arts. Dean Case is dedicated to continue to increase the numbers of students majoring in the School of Fine Arts and ensuring these students will be successful. He says it used to be that we'd talk about transferable skills as a reason to study the arts, and certainly that's still true today. But he says the reality is that the industry is flush with opportunities to make a living. We're making sure that our students enter the workforce ready to create in a way that allows them to flourish. Please join me in welcoming Dean Bob Case to the University of Minnesota Duluth.
Thank you very much, President Kaler, members of the board. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to serve the School of Fine Arts and the University of Minnesota Duluth. I have a great love for Minnesota, as you can tell, and it's great to be back. And I want to just tell you that I promise to work hard every single day during the trust that you put in me to serve as a servant leader for the School of Fine Arts. And I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to a long and successful leadership with the School of Fine Arts. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. You never know. Too much. We got one on the road. Plus these at noon.
I know you can't. That's horrible about it. You just really can't help it. The boss is ready. His boss is ready.
All right, before Regent Johnson tries to join Dean Case's band, we better move on here. And I don't believe Regent Johnson has a fine arts degree, but I don't want to go down that path either. So thank you, Dr. Kaler, and I would now, before moving to accept and approve minutes from the last meeting, note that Regent Simmons and Regent Omari, I believe, are both on the phone. Can we check?
This is Regent Simmons. I'm on. Thank you.
We may not have Regent Omari. If he checks in later, we'll let you know. But thank you, Regent Simmons, for being available today, and jump in anytime throughout the debate if I fail to call on you. So with that, looking back to our October 2017 meeting, I'd entertain a motion and a second, and then consider those for approval.
So moved.
All right. Moved and seconded. Any items to note, corrections, or can we vote to approve those? No No items to change, so all in favor of approving the October 17 minutes signify so with a sign of aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Very good. And now we'll turn to President Kaler for the report from our president.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and good morning, everyone. As you know, I returned Tuesday night from a very productive visit to China. From Hong Kong to Shenzhen to Shanghai to Beijing, during 6 days on the ground, I met with hundreds of enthusiastic alumni, signed an extension of a comprehensive partnership agreement with the prestigious Tsinghua University in Beijing, and discussed exciting research possibilities going forward. And we unveiled our Driven campaign to international audiences for the first time, and we bestowed an Outstanding Achievement Award on our Carlson School alumnus Eric Zheng, one of China's most prominent financial tech executives and innovators. We've been welcoming students from China to the university for 103 years now, and that century-long relationship is serving us well as emerging Chinese universities seek partnerships with us, as our American peers compete for the top Chinese students, and as we seek top-flight study abroad opportunities for our Minnesota students to ensure they are prepared for the global economy. And believe me, there is a great affinity for our university among the thousands of alumni we have in Greater China. It provides us with great opportunities that we must embrace. And you should know that in Hong Kong, during a very engaging Q&A session with about 70 of our alums, one of the pressing questions concerns something that many of you ask about here in Minnesota. That is, you guessed it, how about that Gopher football team? Even in China, and no matter where our alumni live and work, the issues seem to be the same. More importantly, they care, and I'm thankful for that. Matters at home. While we have not yet seen the final tax bill, there was great concern that the tax reform bill in Washington would include a provision to count graduate student tuition waivers as taxable income. That would have negatively affected about 6,000 of our graduate students. But we exercised the power of advocacy in our government relations team, and over the course of the past month or so, our UMN Advocates Network generated over 30,000 emails to our congressional delegation opposing the proposed change. Our voices and those of our higher education colleagues were heard. And it's no wonder that our advocates, under the leadership of our coordinator Mike Miller, recently received national recognition for its efforts on something that's more enduring than just a single or focused campaign, and that's an increase in student voting. The university received a silver seal from the nonpartisan All In-Campus Democracy Challenge, an organization that recognized our achieving a student voting rate of 65.3% during the 2016 election cycle. And our Twin Cities student voting rate was 15 percentage points above the national average of 50.4%. You can't be an engaged citizen without being a voter, and we're interested in creating and educating engaged citizens. So I congratulate our student government organizations and MSA for their great work on this, and I particularly want to acknowledge the efforts of former MSA Government and Legislative Affairs leader Will Damon. He was a leader in the Big Ten, urging all conference schools to increase voter registration, and he led our campaign, fueling 9,600 new registrations, almost twice as many as Iowa and Wisconsin combined. Speaking of the Big Ten, earlier this week, the other Big Ten presidents and chancellors joined me, signing on to a letter I wrote to congressional leadership urging them to take action on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA policy, and find a permanent legislative solution to protect dreamers, outstanding young people brought to our country as children. These high-achieving young adults face uncertain futures, but they're an integral part of many of our communities, and we will continue to raise our voices in support of a long-term solution. Turning to another matter important to all of us, and that is improving campus climate, which continues to be one of my top priorities. We recently strengthened our efforts by appointing Ann Freeman, our longtime university relations internal communication expert and a great campus-wide collaborator, to be our full-time director of campus climate initiatives. To ensure we're coordinating the good work underway across campus, we've established an oversight group with leadership from my office, the Provost's office, University Relations, and others. With Ann in the lead, this group will conduct a campus climate needs assessment using available data conduct an inventory of campus climate work happening in colleges and universities, and look at related scholarly work from our faculty. And across the system, there's a lot of good news. We did have a football team that went to a postseason bowl, and it came from UMD this year. The Bulldogs made it to the Division II Mineral Water Bowl after winning the Northern Sun Conference's North Division title. Pardon me. It's a reflection of UMD's overall athletics excellence. The entire Bulldog athletic program led the NSIC all-sports standing this fall. So we congratulate Athletics Director Josh Burlow and all of UMD's student athletes. At Morris, once again, its commitment to sustainability, a real hallmark of University of Minnesota at Morris, was recognized by the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. That group tracks 17 impact areas, from sustainability education to the environmental impact of campus food service. And Morris was the only public college in the top 10 among baccalaureate institutions, among the likes of elite liberal arts colleges such as Middlebury, Oberlin, and Pomona. And so we congratulate our colleagues in Morris for this work. At Crookston, we also won national recognition against some tough competition. The UMC Crops team competed recently in 2 national collegiate crop contests, finishing in the top 3 in both. The team competed in Kansas City and Chicago last month and placed only behind flagship land-grant campuses Kansas State and Iowa State. The National Crop Judging Contest consists of 3 parts: plant and seed identification, commercial grain grading, and seed analysis. So UMC and its students are playing with much larger institutions and doing very well. At the University of Minnesota at Rochester, Interim Chancellor Carroll helped deliver its State of the Campus address last month. Along with a panel of alumni and students, she spoke of UMR's momentum. And we know already of UMR's largest ever incoming freshman class, but the conversation turned to the possible future look of a UMR campus and, of course, how UMR will host the board for your March meetings, which I know you are looking forward to. Let me close with a few items that demonstrate how we're adapting and delivering as we seek to contribute to Minnesota's vibrant economy. The university's highly respected College of Continuing Education recently changed its name to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, or CCAPS. This name more accurately reflects the programs, courses, and services that the college offers, and it better resonates with its students, which, by the way, number more than 4,700 this semester, including 1,000 who are seeking degrees. And for more than a century, this college has provided opportunities for people to enhance their academic credentials, to advance their careers, and to continue to learn across their lifespan. The mission won't change, but the new name and branding speak of the many CCAP students who are pursuing applied and individual undergraduate and graduate degrees, and those participating in professional development courses, certificate programs, and conferences. And finally, we recently received the results of the university's 2016 employee survey, and it's filled with terrific feedback. More than 1,600 employer partners responded to questions about our Twin Cities student preparation for both their job search and then their new workplaces. And here's what employers said about the 5 top attributes of university hires. They told us our students have the ability to learn new ideas quickly, the ability to function effectively as a team member, the ability to appreciate and interact with individuals different from them. And those employers also told us that our graduates are creative and innovative thinkers, and they have effective interpersonal communication skills. And that is exactly what we want to be doing as we help to prepare responsible citizens, lifelong learners, and the talent force for Minnesota's economy. So from China to Crookston, from civic engagement to sustainability, and from campus climate to the next generation of Minnesota's leaders, I believe we are ending 2017 as the diverse, vibrant, curious, competitive, forward-looking statewide university we can all be very proud of. And with that, Mr. Chair, may I wish you all a happy holiday season, a warm winter solstice, and a happy and healthy new year. I look forward to working with you in 2018 to keep our university the shining star of the great state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kaler. And turning now to my report, I think you all should be getting somewhat used to my interest and desire to use this opportunity to highlight some or all of the 5-part priorities that the board adopted at it following its July retreat. And I've got 4 of those today that I'd like to talk about, and all of them relate to business that we've had today, yesterday, or quite recently, or will have. So, first of all, the Mission Fulfillment Committee remains committed to addressing our priority to drive impact of the university's land grant mission through access, inclusion, and student success. And yesterday we had a truly great conversation about inclusion and diversity, specifically on our Twin Cities campus, and access for underserved populations in the metropolitan area, as well as access to students across the state of Minnesota. We deepened that conversation yesterday through also a discussion of the university's engagement and outreach efforts across our great state. Later in the meeting today, we're going to tackle the draft 2017 accountability report, which probably is the penultimate report this university creates and connects very importantly to the board's priority to preserve and enhance the university's academic excellence and reputation. It's an important tool that we use to carry out our governance and oversight responsibilities and ensure that we continue to strive for excellence in our teaching, research, and outreach missions. That's a key part of our business today. And a third priority relating to philanthropy, the list of gifts that the university has received, something we often drive by, but we never should, that we'll soon accept as part of our consent report, attests to our commitment to increase private and public support for the university's mission. And you'll recall a wonderful sun-filled day in September following our board meeting where we launched the Driven campaign to great applause and great aplomb out on the outside here. And it's been my personal honor, and I know other members of the board have had the honor of helping to launch several of the subparts of the Driven campaign, and I had the opportunity with my wife to help launch UMDs and also to attend the Carlson schools. And I pull those up for your attention only because the board's engaged across there in helping the UMF and the leadership support that critically important priority for the university. And finally, in terms of priorities and highlighting those, the Finance and Operations Committee recommended the appointment of Dr. Jacob Tolar, who I'll recognize here in the audience as Dean of the Medical School. And as we move closer to our priority, a fourth priority here of achieving the vision for an integrated academic medical enterprise, I know Dr. Tolar will be a tremendous asset to the university in helping us attain that long-held priority. Welcome. So a couple of final thoughts here. I'm appreciative of the board for its ongoing commitment to a little bit different governance structure. We launched that in September, and I'm appreciative to my colleagues and the administration for continuing to work on that. In coming months, you'll find me checking in with you individually and in small groups to see how you're feeling about that, and working with Vice Chair Powell and I and our board staff, because I'm interested in your feedback and again appreciative of your interest in moving forward. On a personal note, and many of you saw, I think we routed the elite notice, but I'll be moving to a change in status, and next time we meet in February, I won't have a private sector duty, which may scare some at the university here, but hopefully that'll give me an opportunity to focus even more on this opportunity and this leadership opportunity that I treasure and I'm grateful to have. And I'll just note, without calling out anyone specifically, there's a couple more people in the audience who have been integral to my ability to do this role and to transition from a private to a public sector leadership role. So I'm grateful to them. Finally, I'll note that the board does not meet in January, but we will be back here in February. And in March, we'll hold our meeting in Rochester as we look over the horizon of the governance calendar. So that concludes my report. And moving on to item 5 on the agenda, I would note and receive and file items in the docket related to the quarterly report of grant and contract activity and our annual financial report. And
So moved.
we don't need to, we can just accept those. Okay. Hang on, no, you can move the consent agenda shortly, Regent Johnson. We have a consent report then that is here for review and action, and of course contains the gifts and the All University Honors Committee, naming committee reports, nominating committee, all of which was in your docket materials, and the appointment, ex officio appointment of Dr. Vinogradov to the Fairview Health Services Board of Directors, and then two items that we discussed last month, the conflict management plan for our president and adoption of the resolution related to the 4-H Foundation being transferred into the assets thereof, transferred into the University of Minnesota Foundation. So before we consider our consent report, I'll note that one of the items included for approval is a gift from General Mills, and Regent Powell has recused himself from this vote due to his position at General Mills. Is there a motion to approve the consent report?
So moved. Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. That item is behind us, and we move on to item 7. And as we ask Dr. Constant to come up on behalf of the Faculty Consultative Committee, I'll just say one of the true honors of having the opportunity to lead the board in my vice chair role under then Chair Johnson, and again in my role now is the chance to work closely with our outstanding faculty and the people who take the time and make the added commitment to pick up a very, very significant leadership role at the Faculty Consultative Committee level, and it's been my personal pleasure to get to know Professor Constant, and I welcome him here on behalf of the board to deliver his report on behalf of the FCC. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Chair McMillan, members of the board, I am the 2017-2018 chair of the faculty and Senate consultative committees. I appreciate the chance to address you here today. I'm not familiar with all the matters of protocol, and I know you already have this report in your docket, and so if you'd prefer for me to distribute the quiz first, I can do that. Or I could go to the summary materials. Let me just set some introduction. I'm in my 26th year here as a faculty member in computer science and engineering. I've been here long enough for the name of my department and college and building to change, but I've stayed here because this is a university with outstanding colleagues to work with and with amazing support to take risks on new and different things. I've had the support of this university in spinning technology we developed off into a startup company, in launching new online course programs and trying to build those into things that attract tens of thousands of learners from around the world and then serve our students on campus, and in taking on major service roles both in the field and here within the university. I've added the role recently. Today my oldest son takes his first 2 U of M finals as a PSEO student, which means I get to have dinner with him on campus, and I get a very different perspective. I'm in faculty governance because I've seen that it makes a difference. I've seen that leaders of the university, including the provost, the president, and the Board of Regents, take input from faculty seriously, indeed take input from faculty, from students, and from staff seriously, and that we're all working together to maintain and improve this great university. And so I do want to thank each of you for the time and energy you put into that important task. I'm going to focus today on 4 areas that the Faculty Consultative Committee has spent most of its energies on this fall. First, liberal education. Our liberal education requirements for undergraduates on the Twin Cities campus reached a point where they were due for review. Faculty from across the campus and many others contributed through a variety of forums to weigh in on what the educated student graduating from the University of Minnesota should have had as their experiences as we move forward, with a wide variety of input about fields, about competencies, about group experiences, external experiences, math and science, arts and humanities, practical skills and the ability to learn from media and all sorts of other things. This will not be a rapid process. It is deliberative. It is faculty-led and owned, and it started and is continuing with open and listening sessions that engage the communities that have the greatest expertise and the greatest stake in what goes forward. I only report to you that we are engaging in it very seriously. The entire Faculty Senate has gathered to discuss this and will do so again at least once and maybe twice in the spring. We have a committee that's working on it, and we look forward to letting you know as we get towards something that is concrete. Second, sexual misconduct. A key project this fall has been working to fulfill the Senate's charge to take strong action to address sexual misconduct. As you know, President Kaler launched a four-pronged initiative around sexual misconduct, with governance leaders nominating faculty, staff, and students to serve in various task forces. We pulled together the University Senate as a whole, and unlike our previous model, dispensed with many reports and smaller issues to spend a full hour and a half simply on the topic of sexual misconduct, educating people about what happens, how it is handled on the campus, what we can do to both support the people who are prey to it and to prevent it to the greatest extent possible and make it not welcome in our community. I want to give special thanks and credit to FCC Vice Chair Professor Greta Friedemann-Sanchez, who not only organized that session but has led a bunch of activities to getting us to the point where we were able to carry that out. And we will continue to work closely with our administration in making this something that we take seriously. We reach out to every person on this campus, and we make it very clear that that type of behavior is simply unwelcome and unacceptable. Third, I think many of us were surprised by SEIU, Minnesota Academics United, deciding to withdraw its application to represent Twin Cities faculty. Governance, of course, took no position on unionization, but the individual faculty, both inside and outside, ranged from strongly supporting to strongly opposing unionization, with a large number of people strongly in between and a substantial number strongly undecided. That's behind us, but the removal of the maintenance of status quo order has unfrozen all sorts of issues that were locked up while that was pending, and FCC has been working with the administration and with the full set of governance committees on things that were stalled, issues like parental leaves, faculty development leaves, and other activities that had been temporarily halted, and we're working actively to get these things, many of which will be on your agenda, I expect soon, moving as quickly as possible. Last, governance and consultation. A lot of what happens doesn't fit into a neat category. The FCC, the Senate Consultative Committee as well, meet regularly with senior administrators, consult on policy changes. Vice Chair Friedemann-Sanchez and I meet regularly with many of the senior administrators. We went to Penn State this year for the Big Ten Academic Alliance Faculty Governance meeting, and we came back with lots of ideas and, frankly, also a lot of appreciation for how good we have it here, for the degree to which it's a productive relationship between the administration of the university and faculty governance, and that's something we're really grateful for. We appreciate the board's openness to discussion. We've continued the practice that my predecessor had of reaching out to individual regents. We've met with about half of you, either individually or in small groups. That leaves us half a year and 6 more regents, and we will be reaching out to the rest of you during winter and spring, and look forward to working with our faculty legislative liaisons in the spring as the legislature convenes. Last, just a few words of thanks. I want to express my gratitude to the hundreds of dedicated volunteers, faculty, staff, and students who serve in the governance system, not only the University Senate, but within the colleges and the campuses across our system. it doesn't happen without a lot of people working. And I may sit up here and I'll take all the credit for it, of course, but that's other people's work. Second, I'm grateful to the hardworking Senate staff that really enables us to do this work. Third, I want to thank you, the Board of Regents, the President, the Provost, and the University Administration for your active and open, engaged consultation. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues, the faculty, who's by vote and by action have put their trust in me and given me the opportunity to take on this fascinating and endlessly educational service role. I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Chair Constant, and I appreciate the way you organized and highlighted, your top priorities in that. And I'm going to open it up now to board questions, comments, and feedback, and start with Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you, Professor Constant, for your service to the university and as chair of the FCC, and also for the very substantive report that you just delivered. I'm wondering if you're in a position to, I know this is an ongoing process, and I'm talking about the liberal education curriculum review, willing to share any themes that are coming out of the listening sessions that you've been engaged in?
Sure. Chair McMillan, Regent Powell, what I can say is there are a lot of themes, but there is nothing that has come out clearly. Some of those themes include the question of whether the classic model of liberal education we had could be strengthened by engaging more directly with some forms of knowledge we don't put as much emphasis on, things like design, engineering, what some would call design thinking, interacting with the designed world. Some have put in the question of whether there should be something more related to computation and data, which I of course love but have tried not to simply advocate for in my role. There has been a lot of discussion as to how much of what we think of as liberal education should be in the form of courses versus allowing other forms. Should one learn about cultures in a class on cultures, or should one have the opportunity to demonstrate learning about cultures by spending a summer or a year immersed in such a culture, and other forms of immersed and engaged learning? And I think there's been a lot of discussion about taking the emphasis that we have now separately but very concretely on learning through writing and extending that to communication skills more generally, how we learn through media, but how we learn to communicate through media in all of its forms, written, multimedia presentation, visual, and all of the above. I'm sure I'm leaving a few things out, but that'll give you a sense of the breadth of the types of discussion we're having.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Cohen first, and then I'll come to this side.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and thank you so much for the report. I think it is so important to our university that we have a really well-functioning governance and shared governance, and so I want to applaud the work that you're doing and the report that you gave. And in our last conversation, the meeting before this one, we talked a lot about trust, and one of the things that it seems to me that's coming out of what you're saying is that there is a lot of trust among the various constituents, the faculty and administration, the faculty and the board, et cetera, and how important that is. So thank you for your part in that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll add to that. So on to Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Constant, first, thanks for your report. And as a past chair, and we had the opportunity, Regent McMillan and myself, to meet with you in the FCC, the one thing that struck me about you and your presentation was what I simply call speaking straight. When you spoke, you didn't wonder what you were talking about or if it was kind of stealth language or whatever. You said what you meant, and you meant what you said, and we discussed it. And much appreciation for that kind of presentation. We may not agree, but I liked it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on to Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also. Professor Constant, I really appreciate, outside of this wonderful presentation, I appreciate the fact that you are very clear in your communication as well. And I was very pleased over the past few years as I've interacted with other institutions that when we talk about shared governance, the first comment is always, oh, you've got such a great situation at Minnesota. So I'm perceiving the same thing that you are perceiving from your trip as well. I also appreciate the fact that you and I have sort of spent about 3 decades in the same universe, even though we were in different worlds and hadn't crossed paths before this, I don't believe. But I'm very interested, if you just got a minute to opine, a lot of change at the university over that 29 years that you've been around. And to a large extent, the student body is a very different cohort than it was at a point in time when it was a much more open process and we had a different, success rate on graduation and so on. What are the main, if there are any, what are the main changes that you've seen in the way the student body has developed and how it's engaged with the university?
Dr. Constant.
Yes, Chair McMillan, Regent Rocha, thank you for that question. I think there's several of these changes that have been quite visible. One of them, despite being in the College of Science and Engineering, then the Institute of Technology, which has always had fairly rigorous entry requirements, it is clear that the students that we're receiving today are better prepared and more advanced for the study we're trying to deliver to them than they've ever been. That keeps us on our toes. It challenges us. It's not a tighter distribution. It's just that the mean is moving up and that more people have come in with more mathematics training. In my case, more people have come in with more computer science background than they ever could have when I first started here. And there's really a great deal of interest in learning what we can teach them. At the same time, I think the students are also under much greater stress than I witnessed when I was first here. Some of that's financial. Some of that is the natural consequence of our strong efforts to diversify who we bring in, but in turn bringing in people who don't necessarily have the parents and family who had the experience to teach them what it was going to be like at a university like the University of Minnesota, and they're experiencing it for the first time. Without the support network that many of our other students have, I think it's no surprise that our mental health resources are taxed, and right now this is a climate, not just politically, that is divisive and there is more tension around. I think we also see some of that tension on the faculty side. I don't know what shows through to the students, but when I came here, I was told by my department head, you should be publishing a couple of papers a year in good places and then get a grant and get it renewed and you'll do fine. And at that time, getting a grant was something that 25–30% success rate. Getting a paper was not that hard. To get a couple of papers a year, 25–30% success rate. And we look today, and especially the challenge for our younger faculty, is that same program that was 25% when I applied to it is now funding 5%. And so they need to, on average, submit 20 applications to get one grant funded. Of course, we all do above average, but somebody's suffering below average. The expectations for earning tenure in my day are not that different from the expectations of getting hired as a new assistant professor today. In those days, a couple of good papers, and we said, you had promise, let's start. And then 10 papers later, you were there. Today, we receive resumes from students in graduate school with 10 papers who are suddenly under pressure to, maybe I can produce 5 or 6 or 7 a year. And that has created a case where we have amazing excellence at this university, but we also do have a lot of tension, stress, and people without a lot of slack in their schedules, both faculty and students, and that include in that graduate students. And both of those are really obvious, and I think they're things that it's important not only for us as faculty, but for you as our governing board to keep in mind as you think about how we maintain excellence as we go forward. How do we maintain it without burning it out?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Professor Constant.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Chair Constant. I had the opportunity to have dinner with you and your vice chair, I think the night before you went to Penn State. So I'm a little interested in kind of your thoughts. You mentioned briefly, brought some ideas back, and there are some things that you're thankful for that we do here that maybe some of our peers don't do very well or as well. So I'm just wondering if you can enlighten us a little bit about your thoughts.
Dr. Constant.
Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu, absolutely. I think it's a mix of things and culture. I was shocked to hear that there were faculty in positions corresponding to mine who thought it was odd that we had administrators at our faculty senate. Why would you have them there? That's the wrong relationship. We want to all be there so that we're in a position to actually advise, set policy, and carry it out. I think that the frequency of interaction that we have with members of our senior leadership team and with members of the board is much more robust than at many of our peers. I think the absence of real significant sources of tension. I think we see this at certain schools. We saw this coming out from administrations and in some cases governing boards that either ignored or entirely bypassed faculty governance in searching for new presidents, in coming up with corporate deals in the case of the Kaplan online programs and other things that had substantial and well-reasoned faculty opposition, where the faculty felt not simply that they were heard and overruled, but that they weren't heard at all. And so in that sense, I'm very happy. I think there were things we learned that were really interesting. It was interesting to see at certain boards the role that having faculty members, in some case from the institution itself, in some case from other institutions, sitting on the board as voting board members, has had on their discussions. I think that's interesting. At some of the places we've gone to, all of the board committees have the relevant faculty governance chair sitting at the table at the committee meetings, not always in a voting role, but at the table so that that perspective is represented. There are a number of different ways within the administrations as well that that faculty governance, and in some cases, but less frequently, broader university governance, had structural forms of representation to make sure that we were aware of things going on as quickly as possible. I think our system generally works, but it would be a mistake not to continually look for ways that we might make it even more robust and structurally improve it so that it didn't only work based on the best will of the people involved.
Thank you. And before I call on Regent Anderson for the last question in this portion of our agenda today, I think I heard Regent Omari joining us remotely. Or did I just hear a beep?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Omari. We're wrapping up item 7 on our agenda, our dialogue with Dr. Constant from the Faculty Consultative Committee. And with that, Regent Anderson, the last opportunity here.
And I shouldn't be long. Thanks, Chair McMillan. Chair Constant, interesting, an answer to Regent Rocher's question kind of piqued my interest on something, and it has to do with the mental health aspect. And I was kind of writing here when you said that, but it's kind of the first time I've really heard that there probably is, we'll get to faculty too, but a direct proportion between students without certain resources, whether they're first-generation kids in college and their parents don't know the road or the pathway, or it's financial issues, and potential stress, as you call it, mental health stress. And you also talked about, I think it was graduate students and writing papers and faculty writing papers. I'm well aware of the mental health issues we have with students around the country. From your perspective, do you have any ideas what we up here could do to help with coping mechanisms for these students and faculty?
Dr. Constant.
Chair McMillan, Regent Anderson, I guess I wish I had the expertise, but in the absence of expertise, I think every faculty member will opine on almost anything. I think we have a real challenge because stress is not uniformly bad. What is bad is stress that exceeds someone's ability to use it productively to energize them to perform better, and when it turns into something that handicaps their performance and indeed at some point handicaps their own health. Part of what we need clearly is to pay careful attention to the resources that are available for professional support. And that's true for students, that's true for the employees of the institution. Part of what we need is work that has been going on under a provost's committee to look at how we educate people in a position both to create and ameliorate stress, but also to recognize it. And I'm using stress in a very general sense, but we have faculty working very hard on educating their peers around what things you do in a classroom that may not serve any further educational purpose than a less stressful version of this. How much do deadlines have to be inflexible? How much can you let people know about in advance? Not reducing the standards of the work, but giving people the opportunity to prepare for it and fit it into their lives. What do we know about different types of learning style? And I think part of that is going to be that we will need over time to help people learn how to recognize the symptoms under which it's time to actively get somebody help. Just as we're doing in the work on sexual misconduct, where we're learning and we will be training people that when you hear about this, you have an obligation to do something about it. And that something may include other things, but it definitely includes getting somebody with the professional expertise to deliver help. We're going to need to recognize that when it comes to situations where somebody's not only at the verge of suicide, but is at the point of making themselves unhealthful or counterproductive. Beyond that, I don't have great ideas, but I know this university has a lot of people with a lot of expertise, and I hope you will call upon them to advise you as we go forward.
I appreciate your answer, and it's just something that it's on all of our minds. We're all trying to work on it, and the more help we can get from faculty, from students, from everybody else, I think we'll be better for it. So thank you, Chair McMillan.
Thank you, Dr. Constant. I hope that you will carry our thanks back to your co-chair, Dr. Friedman Sanchez, and we encourage you to continue your outreach with each of us individually and in settings like this. Thanks for your commitment to shared governance and leadership.
Thank you.
All right, item 8 on our agenda is one that I alluded to and referenced in my opening remarks, the 2017 Accountability or Performance and Accountability Report. And as our Chief Academic Officer, Provost Hanson, is getting situated there, I'll just provide a little context. The report is established in board policy as one of the fundamental planning documents of the university, and it also, very importantly, fulfills the university's charter responsibility to report annually to the legislature on the state and the progress of our university. The report will return to the board in February for action. Today is review and discussion. And before I ask Provost Hanson to walk through the materials, I'll let President Kaler open us up here.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. We're going to tag team this a little bit, so I'm going to ask the Provost to work through the first 10 or 11 slides, and then we will have an opportunity for some data, as I promised the group last meeting, that will set the stage for our strategic conversation. So, Madam Provost.
Very good. Provost Hanson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan and President Kaler and members of the board. I'm very pleased to present to you the 2017 Plan, Performance, and Accountability Report, and I'm just the presenter. It's the people around the campus who have really worked on this, and in particular, the person sitting next to me is the one who is really the final person putting this together, Marlo Welshons. As a reminder, the report that appears in the docket is a near final draft. We'll bring this draft for review and discussion today, and then at the February meeting, we'll bring you the final printed report for your approval. The printed version will correct any typos, of which there are likely still to be many at this stage. Many people have worked on this, and it will incorporate any other revisions that come to our attention, anything that might emerge from our conversation today and the feedback we receive from you and others before February. The docket for today's meeting gives some brief background on the history of this report's creation. And in the Governance and Policy Committee meeting in September, you discussed the purpose of this report as a fundamental planning document. Mr. Steves noted the utility of the report to you as Regents, and we're glad to know that this report is considered a valuable resource. I'll also note that Vice President Kramer and his staff rely heavily on this report. It's the go-to source for the news service staff members as they manage the many inquiries we receive every day from the media, and government relations staff provide a copy each year to our state legislators. To that point, I know Regent Beeson asked at the September meeting how we can be sure to present this best to the state legislature. One specific step we're taking this year in response to that question is to work directly with Vice President Kramer and his staff to develop the companion brochure to accompany this report. Production on that piece is getting underway now, and especially now that the report itself is nearly complete, and we'll bring that to you when we return with the final report in February. In September, Mr. Steves also noted that the University Plan, Performance, and Accountability Report has, over the years, been better described by the last two of those three words. It's been a retrospective report on the performance of the university and has been one element in our accountability to the public for accomplishing the mission of the university. We agree that the recent edition of the Progress Card has strengthened the prospective planning function, and we expect that the continuing work to develop the system-wide strategic plan will further inform the framework of this report and thus perhaps enhance the planning aspect of it. So today I'd like to highlight themes likely to be important to the system-wide strategic planning efforts. In the interest of time and in recognition of the fact that much of the data in this report is being discussed more extensively in conversations throughout this month's meeting and throughout the rest of the year, I've chosen just a few key areas that align with one of the system-wide strategic planning directives related to teaching and learning. That is, to identify strategies for improving access, retention, and the overall student experience. Let me first focus on access. Are we ensuring that the opportunity to earn a degree at the University of Minnesota is available to the many different people who make up our state and region's population? And as financial matters clearly affect access, what efforts are we making to ensure that a University of Minnesota education is affordable? The first portion of the Mission Fulfillment Committee session at this month's board meeting yesterday provided a lot of data related to diversity, one issue tied to the matter of availability. So today I'll address a few points related to affordability. Gift aid is high across the institution and continues to grow each year. This measure, and reflected on the screen now, does not include state or federal grants, student employment, or loans. As this is a progress card item, we recognize the importance of monitoring this number. It represents support for a lot of students across all our campuses. Examples of gift aid include things like admission scholarships, collegiate and departmental scholarships, athletic awards, Regents scholarships, and the Promise Scholarship. As this chart shows, the Promise Scholarship benefits students in every county of the state. And as the total amount of gift aid is increasing, we're also seeing an increase in the percent of students who graduate with no debt. For those who do graduate with debt, the average and the median amounts for that debt are decreasing. This slide shows those numbers for the Twin Cities. And these are the system-wide numbers, which show similar trends. So, turning to retention. These are some of the most important metrics we monitor, and they're key progress card measures. Each campus's retention and graduation rate trends are presented in their campus-specific undergraduate education chapter in the report, and these chapters provide the context for their peers as well. Those comparisons are obviously helpful. We've pulled the first-year retention rates together on this slide. Along with the 6-year graduation rates for each campus. We all pay very close attention to these important numbers. Now, many things influence these rates, not all of them under our control or wholly within our control. But please do be assured that we are always analyzing these numbers to identify where we do have things under our control, how we can improve. Now, finally, looking at the student experience, I'd like to underscore what's special about our being a research university. Vice President Levine spoke yesterday on the current levels and character of our research, so this is also a cross-reference from one part of mission to another. As a research university, we expect our faculty to be leaders in their discipline and that they'll bring what they learn through their research and creative activities into the classrooms, along with the spirit of inquiry. And students themselves are directly involved, not just in that sort of osmosis way, but they're directly involved in the research our faculty are doing and in their own self-directed research. It happens in the departments, it happens in the schools, and at the campus level, really the university level, the Office of Undergraduate Research oversees a wide variety of research opportunities for undergraduate students, including credit courses, research-related jobs through student employment, full-time summer projects here at the University of Minnesota and at other institutions around the country, and the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, which helps students participate in faculty-mentored research projects on all our campuses. There's also the annual Undergraduate Research Symposium, which if you haven't attended, I'd urge you to come to. It is wildly impressive. It's large, it's energetic, and it's remarkable what the students are doing. So this is just one lens on the undergraduate experience, the inflection of education by our research mission. So I want to thank you for attention to these few points we've been bringing up today. Thank you for your attention to the full report. We'll make any changes you suggest before we bring you a final draft in February. And now we'll go back to the tag team method, and I'll turn things back over to President Kaler.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. The tag has occurred.
Okay. Thank you, Provost Hanson and Chair McMillan, members of the board. This accountability report is one of our 3 fundamental accountability and planning documents. It reports on our effectiveness in fulfilling our mission. The other 2 key documents are our operating and capital budgets, and they report on the university's fiscal management. Clearly, our shared goal, is to more explicitly align our strategic priorities with our investment decisions in one comprehensive roadmap, and so that is the system-wide strategic plan that members of my cabinet, the chancellors, and I are working on. And members of the board will be able to use this plan as a roadmap for decision-making as we advance the biennial budget. So today I'm going to give you an overview of some other important institutional and environmental data as it relates to planning. We've curated this set of data to a reasonable but not exhaustive degree. So that's a elegant way of saying there's a lot of stuff here, and I hope you will use it. It is not fully processed, but I think it's interesting and gives you some perspective. Peer data, enrollment trends, the list you can read. I would encourage you to look at the entirety of the accountability report, as there are data elements there as well that will be put into strategic context. So as we've updated the University Progress Card, we've cross-referenced that data with the accountability report here. So the page numbers circled refer to the accountability report. And the Progress Card measures are the most important data we monitor and should always inform our planning process. So this, for example, shows our 6-year graduation rate, our progress towards that, and the goal in the year in which we reach it. In addition, if you look at the next visual, I'll remind you of the many different data-rich presentations with strategic planning implications that you've heard and seen since March. So we had a rural health care discussion in March, graduate education update in May, long-range financial planning and operational reallocation updates in June, the Alumni Association annual report and Gopher Athletics annual report in July, the 6-year capital plan in September, and discussion of budget variables and in-depth look on online offerings in October. So there are a variety of presentations that contribute fundamental strategic information to the board. And we have some more on tap for the first half of 18. As we've outlined to you, we're going to move through the 5 elements of the strategic planning organization: February, outreach and public service; March, research and discovery; May, medicine and health; June, teaching and learning; and finally, supporting the mission in July. The board has been well served by the engagement of Regents Rocha and Powell in this with our team, and we will continue to bring you updates. We will have presentations on the Twin Cities campus 5-year enrollment plan, enrollment planning on the system campuses, as well as what you heard about Morris's enrollment yesterday, etc. So a considerable amount of material will come before you. So let me start by really beginning at a high level, just give you some overarching planning data. Here's something that might come as a surprise to you. It did to me. There are 140 post-secondary educational institutions in the state of Minnesota. They offer everything from short-term certificates to research doctorates. Minnesota State has 31 2-year and 7 4-year campuses. The enrollment in their 4-year campuses, 66,000. And there are 70 private 4-year institutions, 34 of them for profit and 36 not. And the not-for-profit enrollment is about 48,000, for-profit enrollment 13,000. So it's a considerably broad and diverse, to say the least, landscape of higher education offerings in the state of Minnesota. But exactly one of those 140 institutions is a Research One AAU flagship university. That's the University of Minnesota at the Twin Cities, and the system campuses play critically important roles as well. We're all familiar with the trends, and I won't dwell on this, but just to frame where we are from a higher education appropriation point of view, we have reset the agreement we have with the state of Minnesota. We've recovered from the depths of the Great Recession, but Minnesota's per full-time equivalent appropriation in constant dollars is 20% less than it was in 2008. The national average is 15% less. And the spending per capita in higher education dating from 1961 to 2017 again has barely moved from 2001 to 2017. Flat funding, and that doesn't account for population, student growth. we've spent a great deal of time thinking about and providing data around the NR rates, and you saw that information yesterday. We'll continue to have those discussions, and this is again for perspective the NR rates. University of Minnesota next to the bottom, and you see a group around the midpoint from Indiana down to Penn State at $34,000. Now, as part of our system-wide strategic plan, we need to be mindful of the tuition environment of all of our system campuses, particularly as they compare regionally. And you'll see Crookston, Duluth, Morrison, Rochester at the top, roughly $13,000, $12,000 to $13,000. Substantially more than the MnSCU four-year campuses, and more than what we think are illustrative regional universities, the North and South Dakota State, for example, $3,000 less than our regional campuses. So we need to understand, of course, the interplay between tuition and financial aid. The University of Minnesota is relatively high-priced compared to some of our competition, but it's interesting and important to understand this in terms of the net price. In other words, what is the average price after accounting for federal grant, work study, and or loan aid? This is the net price, cost of attendance, tuition fees, books, room and board, miscellaneous, minus federal, state, institutional grants, and scholarship aid. And this is, and we could spend a long time talking about this. I suspect we will have some discussion. This is actually, I think, a remarkably good news story for the University of Minnesota. The bands along the top are family income. And you'll see that for under $30,000, for which the expected family contribution from the FAFSA form is approximately zero, the University of Minnesota is the lowest net cost, net price of any of the institutions listed there. As your family income increases from $30,000 to $48,000, we still remain the lowest net price. As you grow up, you continue to see that until we get to $75,000 and over $110,000, we are very, very competitively priced. That's been a philosophy of the institution that's reflected in our Promise Grant program. It's reflected in state and federal grant allocations. And again, the median family income in Minnesota is about $63,500, and so we will often be the most affordable option for over half the families in the state of Minnesota. University of Minnesota system remains increasingly attractive for Minnesota high school graduates. You see that roughly 18% of Minnesota high school graduates attending post-secondary education institutions in Minnesota come here. A slightly smaller fraction to the Minnesota State universities. Again, those are the four-year Minnesota State schools, and a little bit larger for the privates. And that percentage, of course, has grown over time, as you can see. The demography of the state is really important for us to know and understand. And what this graph shows is visually the very clearly important bit of information. That is that essentially all of the population growth in Minnesota over the next 20 years will come from communities of color. And that's led particularly by the growth in the Latinx community. What about the cohort of students that we're able to attract? You'll see a quite interesting visual here. It's animated. Very good. Changes in high school graduates. Again, regions that see an increase of 10%, 5% or more, and then decreases. 2025 decreases hitting the northern tier states, and ultimately by 2030, those decreases moving more broadly, particularly into our region. So important elements of targeting of out-of-state NRNR recruiting, where there will be an increase in high school graduates, is important. What do we do with, well, this is again just a further reflection of that, showing the decrease in Minnesota high school graduates, white Minnesota high school graduates, and the projected increase in Hispanic, Asian, and Black students. And again, on the right side, the annual tracking of that change. So I think the next slide is the survey. Right. This is a little bit of a change of pace here, enabling us to think a little bit about what we actually want to do, and this will inform the teaching and learning component of our strategic plan in a very important ways. 2 columns, the top 5 skills recent graduates seeking stops need to have to be successful, and what the actual people who are hired possess. And you see that written and oral communications, almost 80% of jobs require that, and only about 60% of the graduates have that. It's an interesting alignment of, again, what we expect our students to have when they leave compared to what people who hire them want them to have when they arrive. In the ideal world, these would match exactly. We're close, but there's room to go. A recent report from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences talks about the importance of strengthening the undergraduate education experience and to ensure that the 17 million diverse college students in many types of programs are learning and mastering knowledge skills that will help them for success in the 21st century. This set of information tells us really how we should invest our resources in order to improve the skills that our graduating students have. And again, this is meant for your reflection as you think through this. But again, writing intensive courses, we have nearly 93% of our undergraduates have a writing intensive course experience, and that's an improvement over what our peer institutions, AAU institutions, would have. You can run your eye down the list and see areas primarily where we're pretty good, but we don't, for example, have a common book experience mandated for a university, and many other institutions do. So the next slide will wrap up my presentation with a series of slides. And the bottom line of this little exercise will be that there is exactly one institution that is like the University of Minnesota. And that's important to realize as we go forward in our strategic planning conversation. So here is a set of peer institutions that we believe represent us, the Big Ten publics, additional peers, Florida, Berkeley, UCLA, and Washington, and then some other additional AAU public institutions, which not exactly are peers in many cases, but are what they are. Now, not all of those institutions are land-grant institutions. The University of Minnesota is, and so here in the shaded blue are those institutions we consider moderately considered peers that are not land-grant institutions. They have different histories and responsibilities than we do. Most of the land-grant institutions have schools or colleges of agriculture, but as we discussed, healthcare is a 21st century land-grant responsibility, and different sets of schools have medical schools on their campuses. Only 10 of these schools have both agriculture mission and a medical school. Now, it might surprise you, but many of those schools are heavily focused on undergraduates. Only about half have a concentration of graduates and professional students above 25%. Again, on the Twin Cities campus, we have about 30,000 undergraduates. We have about 16,000 graduate and professional students. All of these schools have research profiles, but not all of them reach into the upper percentiles as we do. Only 11 of these schools have both a heavy responsibility for graduate and professional education and the research profile that we have. Finally, about half of these schools have system offices, which may provide services or carry responsibilities for the system separately from the flagship institution. Half of them have them, half of them don't. And only some of these schools have the significant four-year system campuses as part of their mission delivery. Only 11 schools have significant system campuses, but no separate system office. So finally, the only school among this elite group of public institutions with all of these qualities is the University of Minnesota system. So we are in fact special. We're the only system to meet all of these criteria: land grant, medical, research, graduate and professional, etc. Important obligations that we uniquely in the country are able to fulfill. So that, in a quick walk, gives you some perspective of the challenges that we face, and we'll pull this back together in a drafts of strategic planning documents. And again, welcome your comments, observations, and perspectives. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, President Kaler and Provost Hanson. There's a lot here, and a considerable portion of, if not the entire draft, I believe, is in our materials. It's all there, consuming most of the 400, but good portion of the 425 pages of docket materials today. So procedurally, what we're here for today is to have an initial conversation about the plan, provide feedback to our leadership, and observations, comments, and questions, places that we want the draft to, what we think of the draft, in short. So I'll open it up to the board here for any of those comments, questions, or feedback. And while the group assembled here is thinking about that, why don't I start with Regents Simmons and Omari, either one of them. I'll ask Regent Simmons first if she has any thoughts from remotely. Not be a remote Regent Simmons. Regent Omari, do we have any remote participants?
Yeah, thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm still here.
Sorry.
No worries. I don't have any questions, but I'll just note that the comparative data that we see is a good reminder to us of the unique opportunities that we have within the state, and particularly when you couple it with some of the demographic changes and how we're thinking about it, and that overlap between the other conversations, particularly mission fulfillment, are quite helpful. No questions, though.
Thank you. Others? Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. I like the report. I like the format of it. It's very helpful. I think it's more simplified than it's been in some other years, and I like it. Thank you for all the hard work.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters and staff. That's an enormous amount of effort and energy that goes into preparing these. I know the report includes the progress card, but that needs to be highlighted because the legislature, because they put performance metrics in their appropriations, that sends a message that they want us to be goal-driven. We are goal-driven, but we want to be able to define the goals and not have them imposed on us. So there needs to be good, I think there is alignment between what they're asking for and what we're asking ourselves to do. But the message from the legislature is there are areas of focus, and they want them quantified, and they want them in a goal format. And so our report should lead with that, if nothing else.
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson. You're exactly right, and part of our effort is to further distill this down into a more portable version, and the team is working on that. And again, I just think it's kind of remarkable as you run your eye down the progress card of both the gold and maroon measures. There certainly are elements that we need to improve, the medical school ranking being chief among them. But if you look at almost everything else, it's a really pretty remarkable story that we have to tell, and the opportunity to get this information in front of legislators and engage them into the value the university brings is critically important.
Good. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, and I want to thank you for all the very hard work that goes into this very, very comprehensive report. And so my comments are, coming from someone who is still a little bit new to this. I recognize I'm running out of time to, one more.
We're keeping track here, so.
Yeah, no, I know. It's, I'll soon move from to be part of the problem, but I'm still. And so where I want to go is Provost Hanson. I thought that your summary comments were extremely helpful, and because it's so dense and so data rich that, and considering the audience, that I think navigation and really taking the key messages out of the report is an opportunity for us. And you've already said, that you're going to be working to distill it, and President Kaler, reiterated that. But I have a linear mind, and so starting with access and moving to retention, and with a subtopic on inclusion. And then perhaps moving more clearly to outcomes. And there's quite a bit of work in the report talking about degrees granted and important health areas. I didn't see a lot on student success in finding employment or moving on to graduate schools, which I think is, for me, I think that's an important metric. So the outcome part of the report, I think, is very important, and it could be strengthened a bit. And then I think just some comments on the efficiency with which we deliver the mission. We touch on that a little bit, but the whole conversation on administrative efficiency, student indebtedness, I think is critical. But so I guess I'm recognizing how much work and how much data, and it's a very very detailed report, and to the degree that we can allow the readers to navigate in a more linear way, I think it'll be really, really helpful. Recognizing that there are many positive stories and messages here, which maybe I should have started with that. But so let's make it easy to get to those great stories.
Doesn't sound like a rookie, does he, there, with that kind of advice? Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members, I shut my eyes and I can see President Kaler's predecessor come into my office asking for additional money for higher education, specifically the University of Minnesota, some 20 years ago. And I shut my eyes and I say, Bob, tell me what you do with the money. Show me the performance. That time we were having difficulty with retaining freshmen. We were having difficulty with recruitment of students of color. We were certainly having difficulty with the four-year graduation rate. And I said, Bob, we'll put in some performance measures, and I think the people of Minnesota are willing to give you more money if we show it's paid for performance, for performing. One thing, and I think to follow through on what Regent Powell talked about, one measure, and by the way, these measures are good, and they're improving dramatically over that 18, 20 years. I mean, we got a great story to tell, President. Great story to tell. One thing is what Regent Powell talked about is the measurement of graduates that get jobs. I think you come here to get a job. At the end of the day, you want to be prepared for something in life, right? So graduates that have a job in their field of study, which is important to me, not necessarily a job way out of their field of study. Graduates who have a job in their field of study and that enhance their study to graduate schools. Are those numbers available too from a performance standpoint?
Chair McMillan and
Provost Hanson
and Regents Brigham, they are harder for us to get, obviously, than many of the measures that are internal to our own operations. We certainly try, and the schools try, because we know they're important, and we know they're an important measure of our performance. We'll see what we can do to ramp up the overall institutional efforts to obtain those and relay what we have. My guess is those will never be as complete as the things that we can derive from our own operations, because again they depend on our connecting in various ways with other entities afterwards, not just the students but their other things that track employment. But we can certainly do better on that.
Mr. Chairman, Provost.
Yes, Regent Swiggum.
I realize that those numbers are hard to get your numbers around keeping track of people after they have left the university here. But you would admit that is the ultimate performance, I think, of an institution, is preparing someone for the rest of their life, in a job, in a career. And I just think that's a measurement that Mr. Brunix and I talked about. I haven't seen that, but I see things like I know CFANs, over at CFANs, they have so many jobs for so many. There are many more jobs being offered than we can graduate students in CFANs. I'm not sure that's true in all of our schools, but at the end of the day, when someone's done here in 4 years, or 3 or 5 or 8, whatever it gets to be, I just want to make sure that we prepare them for life. I need that measurement too.
Provost Hanson, any further comment?
Yes, Chair McMillan and Regents Brigham, I certainly agree that it's a crucial one, particularly for the teaching aspect of the mission and the service mission to the state and the nation. There are lots of other outcome measures that we have connected with research, and I think, in fact, in the teaching mission, we're also helping prepare students for citizenship and a variety of other things that are not just in the employment area, but that is clearly a crucial one. So we want to pursue that.
Enough said.
Regent Beeson, a comment on that point?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm glad Regent Sviggum raised this. We have colleges that pronounce or advertise what the salaries of their graduates are. We've got other colleges that say, when I've asked the question, well, we don't collect the data. So there's inconsistency around that issue. It's really important, and I think generally it's going to be a good story. So I would hope that you'd be able to put more effort into this item that Regent Sviggum raised.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. I've got 4 regents yet to speak on this, so we're going to keep moving here. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One slide comment and then a general comment. When I look at the system-wide Promise Scholarship map, where it shows the percentages of the counties, my first reaction to that was that those are very high percentages, but when you start to get to some of the remote parts of the state, it's because there are very few people that are coming from those. And I think that as a legislator, that is something that would certainly trigger in my mind. It's it's more of a hard number issue as opposed to the need side as I'm making this evaluation. So the more general comment is this is really helpful data. I especially like the portion where we start looking at the way the university fits within the higher ed system of the state. I think that's very, very important for us because, as we know by just doing the simple math, we have some numeric issues with just the sheer number of students that are in MnSCU by comparison and to the University of Minnesota, which is obviously a significant number of students. But we have to keep making that case, and this I think data starts to help us make that case. One of the points that President Kaler has made when we talk about resident, non-resident, is that the university is a magnet for talent. It's the only public institution in the state that would serve as a magnet for top talent from outside the state. I prefer the corollary that we're also the only public that has the ability to retain the top talent among the publics. And so when I look at the case to the legislature, why, even though there may be more students in seats across the multitude of MnSCU colleges, the fact that we have these high performing students, high ACTs, exceptional students that are attending the University of Minnesota, when you look at the numbers that we just recently received, where nearly 9 out of 10 Minnesota students that attend the university stay in Minnesota, whereas about 27% of students from outside the state stay. Well, I would suggest that if we're not here to hold Minnesota students here where they have ties of family and are comfortable with the climate and so on and so forth, when they go someplace else, that 10% departure rate probably jumps up to something around 30% like students that come here for the first time. So making the case for why we need to be funded and why we need to make sure that we're providing access to not just undergraduate education that prepares someone for a position, but that cutting edge undergraduate education and graduate education that has that relationship with research that we can provide that no other institution in the state can provide like we do. That's our best case scenario, and our land grant status, I think, is another thing that is a huge competitive advantage for us. So I would caution a little bit about it's a little, I think, almost a little bit self-defeating to go in and show how inexpensive we are across various categories. For one is I think that it doesn't always capture the complexity of an individual student situation. They may be tethered to a high income but not have access to it. And so that student is at a huge disadvantage versus somebody who comes in with an intact family of lower income. But the other thing is a legislator may look at that and say, well, if you're able to keep it this low for students of lower income, then maybe these other systems that those students are paying a lot more need the money more than you do. So just be careful we're not sort of arguing ourselves out of the case for getting that additional money from the public to support this public institution in our significant and unique role in the state. Thanks.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Go to Regent Lucas next, and then I've got Regents Cohen and Anderson, and that'll, I think, wrap us up.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'll make it brief. I think this whole report is, outstanding and triggers lots of good conclusions. But I'd rather see a deeper dive on the access part. I think that map that Regent Rocha referred to seems a little like raises more questions than answers. And you look at the entire metro area being one color, and it just struck me that it probably doesn't tell the story as well as it could.
No. All right. He doesn't look like there's just taking it in here, huh? Provost Hanson and President Kaler. Thank you. Regent Anderson, Regent Cohen passed.
Okay, thank you. I can call your attention, you don't have to look at it, but the slide that had the comparative tuitions between a lot of the MnSCU campuses and our campuses in Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester. As somebody who lives out there, I will tell you that those 4 campuses, at least anecdotally, and I have boys who are college age, at least anecdotally, they're looked in on as comparable with MnSCU, with the M offering. But it is, I think, a tremendous challenge, that 40% tuition rate for getting kids from greater Minnesota to go to our system campuses because of that. I don't know what else we can do about it. I think Chancellor Black is probably out there. My wife says, Tom, do you believe all the kids from Alec going to UMD? So I think anecdotally we think there's a lot of kids going to UMD, but I don't know. I know that the Crookston campus, and we heard it from Morris yesterday, that we heard their deal, and I know on Crookston they've been doing focus groups, and I think at least one of the things they found out is that there's not a big visibility for them as compared to the Bemidji's, the Moorheads, and Vancouver. I don't know why that is, but I think we just have to try to figure that out. We just have to all know that we got to keep drawing students, and we got to help one another on the system campuses. But it is a tug on those campuses because of our tuition there, and I don't have any golden bullets, but I just want to tell you that I see that from where I live.
All right, thank you, team and leadership here at the university. This is a big endeavor, but one of amazing importance to us and our stakeholders. Regent Swigum, when you started to talk about President Kaler's predecessor, it brought back a vision for myself of my first meeting with a Jimmy John sandwich back here with President Brunix and Brian Steve's predecessor, and at the top of a foot stack of paper was this report. And it was a very daunting report at the time, and I don't mean to critique them. I think it's gotten to a point now where it is considerably more user-friendly, but you're getting all kinds of feedback about how it might get even better yet. So I'm pleased that today it isn't as daunting and challenging to pick up. There's more there. It's a little bit easier to get at, but lots of opportunity to continue to improve and refine and make better yet. So thank you.
Thank you.
Item 9 on our agenda is an action item, ratification of the administrative policy on sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence. And I'm going to ask our Associate General Counsel, Mr. Slavitt, and Director Marisam to the table and context this item this way. At our October meeting, we had a good discussion and a review on this policy, and we also took action on two related policies, the Student Conduct Code and the Board of Regents policy, and the administration has been out getting comments and feedback from Regents and the university community, and I think we're going to hear about that feedback now. And I say this with great candor, and that is, this is a lot of work. There's been a lot of work put into it. Several of our own members of the board, plus both of you, and a whole lot more. So we come at this knowing it's not easy, but it's vitally important. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair McMillan, Regents, President Kaler. Deputy General Counsel Slavitt and I are here today to further discuss and also to seek board action on the proposed administrative policy on sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence. During our presentation, I'll first review the item that's up for action today. Then I'll summarize the key policy changes that have been made since the October board meeting. And then I'll discuss the proposed policy on employee reporting of sexual misconduct, which is the most significant substantive change made in this policy as compared to the policies that are in place now. So today we're seeking the board's ratification of the administrative policy with an implementation date of January 1. And I'll give just a little bit of background on how the policy got to this point. In 2014, the Office for Civil Rights, which is the federal agency that enforces Title IX, investigated a Title IX complaint filed by a university student. In September 2015, the matter was resolved without any findings of Title IX violations, and it was resolved through a resolution agreement between the university and the Office for Civil Rights. As part of that resolution agreement, the university agreed to develop a single policy and procedure addressing sexual misconduct. We looked at this mandate to develop a new policy as an opportunity to really move our sexual misconduct work forward in significant ways, which I think this policy does. First, the new policy provides comprehensive information in one place that's applicable to staff, students, and faculty across all campuses. Currently, this information is scattered in multiple policies and websites, so this proposed policy will make it easier for university members to find and access information about our sexual misconduct response process. Second, the policy has a few substantive changes that will improve our response process. The main change is that the policy broadens the requirement that employees contact the campus Title IX office when they learn that a university member may have experienced sexual misconduct. And I'll talk a little bit more about this change in a minute. Third, the policy provides a great deal of additional detail about how the university responds to sexual misconduct reports, which in my mind is the most important benefit of the policy. For the most part, these additional details aren't changes in how we operate. They reflect how we're already responding to sexual misconduct, but this will be the first time that they're all laid out in one comprehensive policy. Adding this additional detail increases transparency. It informs our community and the parties in these cases about what exactly they can expect from our process. And this is important because we want to continue building understanding about and also trust in how we do this work. And we also want to hold ourselves responsible for providing the highest quality sexual misconduct response processes. So this administrative policy underwent an extensive consultation process with stakeholders system-wide. The University Senate approved the policy last May, and the President's Policy Committee approved the policy in September. As Chair McMillan referred to at the October board meeting, the board approved the Board of Regents policy on sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence with an effective date of January 1. So that board policy aligns with this administrative policy, and both policies contain the same definitions of prohibited conduct. At that October meeting, the board decided that the administrative policy should undergo the 30-day public comment process in accordance with university policy, which it has, and then come back before the board for possible ratification with a January 1st implementation date, so that both the administrative and board policies would become effective on January 1. And this will enable the university to move forward with its plan to provide sexual misconduct prevention and response training, which will include important training on the new employee reporting requirement to all employees in 2018. So since the October board meeting, we've made a number of changes to the administrative policy based on helpful feedback that we've received from Regents and also from stakeholders during the public comment process. I'll just briefly summarize those key changes. First, we clarified which campus offices will investigate non-sexual misconduct concerns that arise during a Title IX investigation. So there are times that a campus Title IX office investigation reveals possible misconduct other than sexual harassment, sexual assault, non-sexual stalking, and relationship violence. And we clarified in the policy that in those cases, the Title IX office will forward this information about possible non-sexual misconduct to the campus office that's generally responsible for investigating that type of potential misconduct. Moving to the second bullet, we added detail about which offices and officials are responsible for particular duties and decisions in the sexual misconduct response process. For example, we clarified who decides whether to provide a party with a requested accommodation and who decides whether to permit a party to bring an additional advisor to the hearing, and other decision points. Third, we added a requirement that supervisors and human resources representatives report all sexual harassment that they learn about, including sexual harassment directed at employees or third parties, to the campus Title IX office. Currently, supervisors and human resources representatives sometimes receive and address reports that an employee has engaged in sexual harassment. But there's not currently a requirement that supervisors or human resources staff share these sexual harassment reports that they receive with the campus Title IX office. So there's currently not a centralized collection point for employee sexual harassment reports. And the proposed requirement that supervisors and human resources representatives share this information with the campus Title IX office will allow us to keep centralized records of sexual harassment reports involving employees. It'll also allow for improved coordination and oversight of sexual harassment reports so that we can better identify and resolve any recurring problems, and so that we can also ensure that all reports are being handled in a consistent way that complies with this administrative policy. And finally, under the fourth bullet, we clarified policy language and added details in some places so that the policy is as readable, understandable, and informative as possible. So I thought it might be useful before we open up for discussion to take a little time to discuss the policy provision requiring employees to report information that they learn about possible sexual misconduct to the campus Title IX office. This is the biggest substantive change made in the policy as compared to our current policy, and this is also the aspect that has been of most interest to university community members, both during our consultation process and also during the 30-day public comment process. So under our current policy, employees with supervisory or advisory responsibilities must report sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence to the campus Title IX office. Under the proposed policy, the reporting responsibility is broadened to all employees, except for those designated as confidential resources, such as victim advocacy offices and those with a professional duty of confidentiality. Under the proposed policy, all university employees must report sexual assault, stalking, and relationship violence, and also sexual harassment directed at students to the campus Title IX office. And as I spoke about earlier, supervisors and human resources representatives must additionally report sexual harassment directed at employees to the campus Title IX office. This policy brings us in line with the majority of our Big Ten peer institutions, which already have a reporting policy similar to this one in place. So here's what happens when the campus Title IX office receives one of these reports. We email the impacted person to express that we're sorry to hear about their experience, provide information about resources for personal safety and support, to provide information about how to request accommodations to their housing, work, or courses if they need them, to provide information about options for investigation, including by the police and the campus Title IX office. Also to invite the impacted person to meet with the campus Title IX office staff member. And when we contact them, we let them know that it's up to them, whether they want to meet with the campus Title IX office or even respond to our email. So that is how we respond as campus Title IX offices when we receive one of these reports. We don't automatically initiate an investigation into a report. And that's because we believe it's critically important to allow the person who's experienced sexual misconduct to have control and to decide whether or not to initiate an investigation. There could be a circumstance where the campus Title IX office would need to conduct an investigation, even when a complainant didn't want that. But in student cases, this is limited to situations where we assess that there's a real threat to campus safety, and we have sufficient information to investigate even without the complainant's participation. And that's rare. In fact, to my knowledge, EOAA, the Twin Cities campus Title IX office, has never investigated a student sexual misconduct report without that student's consent. When we receive reports of sexual misconduct by employees, we have different legal obligations, and that make us more likely to investigate those reports. So we've done significant consultation with stakeholders on the employer reporting portion of the policy, and the full policy was approved last May by the University Senate, comprised of faculty, students, and P&A and civil service staff. However, as we engaged in this consultation, some faculty and also graduate students raised concerns about this employee reporting requirement. And in particular, I've heard from some sincere concern that the reporting obligation will make it less likely that impacted persons will reach out to employees for help, or that it will unnecessarily undermine the agency of employees or those harmed by sexual misconduct. And I agree that there are real complexities associated with this reporting requirement, and also that any new requirement that we ask employees to meet can create some uncertainty about how the requirement will work in practice. And so we have worked with these stakeholders to address concerns and refine and clarify the policy. At its core, the reporting obligation is intended to support those who've experienced sexual misconduct and to increase trust in the university's response processes and resources. One key goal, and we're at bullet 1 here now, is to provide information to impacted students and other university members about resources at the time that they need it most, so that they can decide which resources to access. Many faculty and staff who may receive these disclosures know of all the resources available to support those who've experienced sexual misconduct, but other faculty and staff don't have that knowledge. So by having the campus Title IX office reach out to those who've experienced sexual misconduct, we can ensure that we consistently and accurately provide all this information. Another key goal is that when a faculty or staff member learns that someone has experienced sexual misconduct, we want them to have the knowledge and the tools to respond well. We never want a student to share that they've experienced sexual misconduct and then to walk away from the conversation feeling disappointed that a representative of the university didn't do anything or didn't take seriously what happened. We know from research and also from experience that this first university response really matters and can determine whether a student will choose to access university resources for personal support or initiate an investigation. So the university is providing sexual misconduct prevention and response training to all employees system-wide this winter. And this training will discuss the employee reporting obligation and also provide employees with tools to respond better when they learn about sexual misconduct. And our hope and belief is that through the employee reporting requirement and our investment in training employees on how to respond, we can ultimately respond in ways that will make impacted university members feel more supported and more likely to reach out for help. Finally, we want to create a campus culture where sexual misconduct is taken seriously, and those harmed by sexual violence and other forms of sexual misconduct are supported by university resources. We know that one of the primary reasons that students don't report their experiences of sexual misconduct and don't access resources for personal support is that they don't believe their experience was really serious and that it's just one of those things that must be endured, even when they're really struggling after experiencing an incident of sexual misconduct. So one of the things that this reporting obligation does is ensure that when a student or other university member shares an experience of sexual assault or other sexual misconduct with an employee, it's every time treated seriously and with compassion, both by the employee and a Title IX office staff member. Employer reporting also allows the Title IX office to monitor campus for patterns of sexual misconduct, and then we're then able to address any patterns through education and monitoring, even if the impacted students want to maintain their privacy and not initiate an investigation. Overall, the employee reporting requirement and the other provisions of the proposed administrative policy are important components of the university's ongoing work to more effectively prevent and respond to sexual misconduct. This is the end of our prepared presentation. We look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Director Marisam and Mr. Slavitt. I don't know if I unintentionally promoted or demoted you earlier when I called you Associate General Counsel, but our Deputy General Counsel is here as well, so nothing unintentional intended there. Thank you for that comprehensive walkthrough, and I'll open it up for conversation, noting that this is important that we reach a vote and move forward, as the scheduled implementation is January 1st, which is two weeks away. I'll look to the board. Comments? Question? Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support the resolution. I understand to ratify the policy. Am I tracking that properly? It's trying to figure out what the process is. We're a member of the board, want to make a change in a ratification context, but I'm not going to propose any today. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I think there are significant improvements. I think the clarity, as Director Marisam mentioned a bit ago, is it's a lot easier for me to read, not to mention potentially an 18-year-old student, who's under all kinds of stress, to include this, to be able to understand this. So I do appreciate that, and would certainly not want to, for any of my reservations about specific items, I wouldn't want to see us not be able to proceed with the timeline that we're currently on. That being said, as we know, this is a critically important topic for all parties involved, and for our community as a whole to understand that we're taking this seriously and are able to do it in a way that it doesn't seem to disregard the rights and interests of anybody involved. So I would consider this to be a continuing conversation. Obviously, things are at the national level, and institutions all across the country are continuously reviewing these challenges and trying to find the best way. I think we're pretty close to the best way among our peers, and so I appreciate that. I do want to just make a couple of comments. The one frustration, as Deputy General Counsel Slavitt knows, I've talked about the issue that when the interests are so high for the reporting party and for the respondent in a situation like this, and this, again, maybe to some extent it looks like a nail to me, because in another part of my life, the Department of Defense, when they have these matters on the same standard in a very similar way, they provide counsel to both the victim and to the accused. And to me, that always has made a lot of sense, because under our current rule, you're allowed to bring an advocate, and that advocate may be an attorney. which means if you have the resources for an attorney, you're entitled to that kind of representation, but if you don't, you don't. And that doesn't feel right to me. We do an awful lot to try to improve access for people of all backgrounds, and so certainly in this situation, I don't think access to competent guidance in a very important area should be limited to those who happen to have the fortune of those means. My request in regard to that was not met. I had requested for information about the number of incidents that would fall under that category under this policy, and then with that, an understanding of what the cost is for us to provide advocates as we do now compared to what the cost would be to perhaps contract with resources outside the university to be on a contract basis to provide that kind of legal guidance, to really understand what the financial implications are. Because my estimation is it would be a sound investment for the university to make sure that as people go through this process on both the victim side and the accused side, that they would have a full understanding of what the process is. I don't think anybody would feel that we win by people being unclear and confused in the process. So that's something that we can continue to talk about as we go forward. I do note that the professional students, and this was actually an issue that came up from our previous iteration on this, where this gets socialized around the community. But I'd gotten feedback that there were some folks that had provided input that wasn't really presented to the board. We didn't understand that there was a view about some of the issues coming from our professional graduate students, in this case professional students, which would include students from the law school, so they would certainly have a particular interest. And so I would just suggest to my colleagues on the board, if you haven't read it yet, I believe that was presented to all members of the board to please take a look at that. And those are, I think, considerations that we would move forward with. One of the areas that I am uncomfortable with in the policy as it is and I brought this up, is we keep referring to the Title IX office or designee. Where that's challenging to me is I would rather it simply say the Title IX office has responsibility for all of these things, and then maybe there's some place that says that under certain conditions the Title IX office may designate someone else to conduct the investigation or otherwise. Because I look at this as we have a Regents policy, and we're designating the Title IX office as being accountable for implementing it. But then to allow another designation without any sort of standard for who may be designated, I would like to have more clarity on that as we go forward. And so as you implement it as it's written, provided it passes here today, or is ratified here today, I just bear in mind that I think the board should be very sensitive as to who these things would be designated to, and we might want to try to figure out a way of cleaning up that language. And then we did talk about the issue of initial findings versus charges. We had a report recently that recommended that to avoid confusion about what comes out of the EOAA investigation process, if we called it charges, there wouldn't be this confusion that it had been fully adjudicated with findings. And I understand now we're talking about initial findings, which would tend to make that appear that it's not a final resolution, and I think that's true. The response to the suggestion that we would remain with the recommended charges from the report was that this would confuse people to think that this is a criminal proceeding. We can't avoid confusion that this is a criminal proceeding. We have a proceeding that is finding a person responsible or not responsible for essentially a felony level. So, I mean, there's always going to be that confusion. My sense is that whether it's a finding of a basis to proceed or of finding of charges, to me that would provide more clarity to folks that this is the determination by the office that there is a basis to put this in front of an SSMS proceeding to make a determination of whether there's responsibility for a misconduct under this policy. And part of why that's important to me is because, as Deputy General Counsel Slava and I, as he knows I've raised, is that understanding who has access to that investigatory process, if there are findings that are then the basis for specific action, and understanding that that would be a perception that is a final finding, then I'm much more concerned about who's part of the process of getting there. If it is simply an identification of charges, then I'm really not so concerned about who's part of it, because it simply is articulated as charges, and then the process moves into a fair SSMS process where there's full participation by all parties involved. So that's something that I would like to continue the conversation as we go forward. And then finally, the last thing I'll mention And I hope somebody does bring up the issue about this reporting, because I do know that the students and faculty have some concern, and maybe that's something we could discuss a little bit more. But I'm not quite sure we have amnesty right just yet. There's the new provision that if somebody has intentionally sought to impair somebody, that they would not be entitled to amnesty. No question that somebody seeks to impair somebody, that is a terrible, terrible crime against another institution, another individual, if not the whole institution. But I still maintain that were it a loved one for any one of us, if we have to choose between prosecuting a person who did something bad and then perhaps change their mind because the person is in harm's way, I would much rather focus on the safety of the individual and maximizing the prospect of getting them assistance. Now, maybe this is one of those things because we're weighing the prosecutorial value of going after people doing bad things against the safety of the individual who is in harm's way. It may have to be sort of a Regents policy level to say, as an institution, we will always place the safety of people above our ability to go after folks. Because quite frankly, if somebody is doing that, they're probably going to have some problems outside the university context. But from my standpoint, I wouldn't want anything in our policy to prohibit or to inhibit somebody's attempt to find somebody help if they're in harm's way. So that being said, and after this soliloquy, to throw it into a question, Mr. Chair, if we could just have a better understanding in relation to the concerns about the reporting. My concern about the reporting, seeing again in my other life, is a person who has suffered sexual misconduct they're not necessarily thinking about where do I go to give a restricted report. They're talking to the first person that they know or trust. But once that person knows, they lose then that ability to seek that confidential communication. How do we prevent that? How do we not put that person now in a position that he or she doesn't want to be in until they know they want to be in a position where it is reported and running up through the proceeding?
Thank you, Regent Rocha. And I heard 5 different areas for additional feedback and a specific request or additional work over time. But we did hear, I think, a reference from Professor Constant today about the faculty's view of this, and I know Director Marisam did briefly reference some of the graduate student input. If you'd like to provide a little more around that, all of the board did see that, and they were well written, thought out, and I think well articulated concerns. And I think if I put words in your mouth, Director Marisam, it was that we really want the entire university community, the employees, and everybody to be reporters. And maybe you could put a little more color around that with Regent Rocha's question in mind.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regent Rocha. So I'm happy to talk about this because this is a complex issue where we're balancing competing interests. And I can talk about kind of the most significant concerns that I've heard and share some thoughts on them. So one of the concerns that has come up is that the reporting requirement will take away the agency, reduce the choices of those who've experienced sexual misconduct. Because in effect, if say a student who's experienced sexual misconduct tells their faculty member, now that information will be shared with the Title IX office, right? So the student loses control in that information being shared. My thought about that is that when we get that information at the Title IX office, we keep it confidential. We don't initiate an investigation unless that's something the person wants. Our sole response is to reach out to that student with compassion and to provide them with a list of all of their options. So I actually see it as us providing more control and empowerment to those who've experienced sexual misconduct because we're providing them with all of their options. And then allowing them to decide what resources they want to access and whether they want to initiate an investigation. Another concern that has come up has been that if, say, students who experience sexual misconduct know that a faculty member is going to need to share this information with the Title IX office to get them resources, that maybe the student then won't reach out to the faculty member, right, and won't reach out for discourse or support. And this is, we don't know the answer to this empirical question. The anecdotal evidence on this that I have from our peer institutions, all of whom have these reporting policies, is that once after the reporting policies went into place, the reports continued to rise. So that may be for a number of reasons, but at least we know that the reporting policy hasn't completely chilled reporting. My belief is that as the university learns about this reporting requirement and how to fulfill it, and I think really important to your point, Regent Rocha, is that we have informed students about the requirement so that they know from the get-go, and we've already incorporated into the training that they all receive before they come on campus. So they will receive this information up front and then at other times. But my belief is that once we start to understand this reporting requirement as a community, it will actually build trust in the university as taking this matter seriously, wanting on every occasion to provide all the support and resources that we can to the students while still respecting their ability to choose what they want to happen next. So, there are different ways of looking at how this is going to play out, but the concerns that have been expressed are good ones. I would say that I did some benchmarking, and all of the Big Ten schools have these reporting policies where they designate certain categories of employees to report to the Title IX office. Across institutions, the policies differ a little bit, but the majority of Big Ten institutions do require all employees to report, and 10 of the 13 other institutions require all faculty members to report. And based on my read of the policies, none of them exempt graduate student employees from the requirement. That graduate student employees are treated as other employees. In my view of the importance of including graduate students in the requirement is that, as graduate students employees serving as TAs, lab instructors, working in the lab, often supervising formally or informally undergraduate students, they're really in a position where they might receive disclosures about sexual misconduct by students who are looking to them as people in positions of authority and who are confiding in them because they think they have the ability to do something to support, guide them, provide resources, maybe take some kind of action. So that's the reason for it. I would say that, graduate students have raised very articulately some unique concerns about their roles, that in particular that as graduate students, their academic lives and their employment lives and social lives are often intertwined, right? They're working on their, dissertation work in the lab where they're also employed with their cohorts from their department who are also their friends, right? So that it could be confusing for them to know if I share information about a sexual assault with a member of my cohort while we're working together in the lab, do I need to report that? So we did some work to really define and limit the situations in which graduate student employees would need to report, really trying to hone in on those places where someone would be telling them because they see them as someone in a position of authority. So situations when they learn about sexual misconduct from someone they instruct, someone they formally and informally supervise, or someone they advise. And here we're talking about residence hall advisors, orientation leaders that are student employees. So I'm happy to talk about this further, but those are some of my initial thoughts.
I think you've provided a balanced and comprehensive and thoughtful, or reflecting a thoughtful approach to what was good input there from a key stakeholder group. And personally, I tend to land where you did and the administration has. But I want to keep us moving here, and I'm going to turn to Regent Hsu. He had his hand up earlier on a broader set of the overall ratification question, or something specific?
Some general things and some specific things.
Proceed.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, presenters. Thank you for all the work you've done on this, and thank you to all of the other people who've submitted feedback on this. This is a very important topic. As we all know, things have changed a lot since a few years ago, and I reflect back on the investigation and report into our former athletic director and to the Shanfield-Dixon report that we spent, $750,000 on. And one of my questions at the end, during that presentation, or at the end of that presentation by the attorneys, was, how should we think about sexual assault? Because that was purely sexual harassment. And the answer I got was, oh, well, you only paid us to look at sexual harassment. And that's when I figured out that we have different policies and And then when I started asking questions, I was told that the Office of Civil Rights had spotted that as well, and that we had made an agreement with them to consolidate, and now we're kind of getting towards the end of that process, and I appreciate all the things that have happened to get us to this point. I'm going to support this. However, I think the conversation is not complete because of the change in the direction from the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, and all that stuff is going to play out over the next couple of years probably. But I do have some questions regarding specifically the students. They did ask us to look at this. And when during the presentation, I think a lot of the talk was graduate students. But what about non-graduate students who are also employees of the university? How should they, or how are they going to be expected to behave under this new policy?
Director Marisan.
Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu. So all employees, including graduate and undergraduate student employees, are subject to the requirement. However, for both graduate students and undergraduate students, we restricted it to situations when they either witness sexual misconduct while they're at work, or when they learn about possible sexual misconduct from someone they instruct, informally or formally supervise or advise if they're like a residence hall advisor. So they're subject to the requirement, but we worked hard to limit it to situations where they would be seen in some kind of position of authority to take action.
Regent Hsu, another question.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just to follow up, I think that's the right way to look at it. My concern is just that when we have this mandatory reporting requirement and let's say someone knows about something and doesn't say anything and there's no penalty associated with it, then are they really going to, in many cases, come forward and say something, whether it's a faculty member or other employee of the university? Is there any teeth to this policy in terms of if you know or witness something and you don't come forward and we find out later, how does that affect you for not coming forward?
It is a requirement in the policy, and if we have had situations under our current policy where someone has not reported, and generally we address that by talking to them and maybe their supervisor, and generally it's an education issue, not a disciplinary issue. But if we had a situation where it became apparent that someone was intentionally not reporting, right, to cover up a problem, then that would be referred to their supervisor or unit head as as any other kind of performance matter would be for them to resolve.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. So then are you saying that would then create possibly another, whether it's a conduct code or some other investigation as to whether or not a person was involved in this and decided not to come forward and tried to cover something up? Would that be a separate investigation done by your office or some other office?
No, that would be something that a supervisor would handle in their discretion, as they would any other kind of issue where an employee wasn't fulfilling their job duties.
Okay.
One more, Regent Hsu.
Yeah, I know this is a very complicated topic, and there are a lot of things, aspects to this, but it is very encompassing. And in terms of some of the things, I want to just make sure I echo what Regent Rocha mentioned earlier regarding some of the things. I won't go through all of them, but regarding some of the things that I think we should take a further look at or future look at. But one of the ones I do want to make a point about is the use of the word finding or initial finding versus charges. I think, in fact, the Dorsey and Whitney report came back and suggested that we use charges, I think, or maybe they said charges or preliminary findings or initial findings. But I think it's very, very important that we use the right language to describe what's happening so that people can have a better chance of absorbing the material. Because I think the use of language in this is very important for people to understand and to remember what they've been trained on. And I do want to make the further point that I'm glad that we are actually going out and making sure that we have mandatory training. I was a little bit surprised when I asked about how much training we were doing, and 3 of us regents went through the training few years ago, and I asked, well, how many other people are getting trained? And they showed me some numbers, and it was, I think if you add them all up, it was around 2,000 people participated in training, and some of those people could have participated in multiple trainings and been counted multiple times. And if you compare that to the total number of employees that we have, approaching 26 or 27,000, it's a very small number of people who've ever been trained on this at the university. So I'm glad we're moving forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu, and I'm going to call for a vote of the board at this point, and would ask that this is before us, properly before us for adoption.
Mr. Chair?
For ratification, yes.
Need a motion? I move.
Thank you, Regent Rocha, for the motion, and that's seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Patty, was that was a affirmative vote, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Sorry, Regent Simmons. There was just a delay there in communication. So thank you for your participation. And I want to, before we move on, recognize and thank Regent Rocha in particular for bringing his tremendous amount of experience, skill, and perspective in the world of investigating, adjudicating, and dealing with these sort of matters. You bring a lot to the university, and thank you for the extensive time you've committed to improve these.
Thank you.
With that, we can move on to item, let's see, not 10 on our board, a somewhat related student conduct code matter relative to how we proceed with student group jurisdiction. I believe Deputy Counsel Slavitt's going to stay here and walk us through this one. And when you have, I don't know if you have presentation materials or not. He does. All right. And I'll give you, the always unfair, but must say, move quickly if you can, sir.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I can move quickly. My presentation is one slide, so there. So, as you'll recall, at the last board meeting, the board directed the President's Office and the Office of the General Counsel to consider and then recommend new language for the conduct code relating to student group responsibility. Since that time, the President's Office and the General Counsel's Office, with input from the board, has put together new policy language that it recommends the board consider. We have consulted with all of the campuses with the people who work with student groups or with respect to student discipline, reviewing this language with them, and they all thought this language would be a good change for the conduct code. Looking at the slide, you'll see it's subdivision 4 of section 8 of the conduct code, and we're replacing a paragraph before relating to when conduct of a student would be attributed to the student group with a slightly more detailed provision. As you'll see now, there's 2 subdivisions, so there's 2 ways in which a student group will be responsible. The first one, if the student group directs, sponsors, or endorses the conduct that violates the student conduct code, then it can be liable for that conduct. Or subdivision B, any officer or officers of the student group knew or reasonably should have known the conduct that violated the student conduct code was likely to occur during or directly related to an activity or event conducted by the student group, and the officer or officers failed to take appropriate steps to prevent the conduct. So there's 2 ways in which student conduct can be attributed to student group conduct. The other sections of the jurisdiction provision here will still apply. We'll still look at the nature of the conduct to see whether it fits within the conduct code, but subdivision 4 will specifically apply as well to student groups. So that's the language we suggest the board review it at this meeting and then come back in February after there's additional time for comment from the university community to vote.
Good. Thank you, Deputy Counsel Slavitt. It is always a challenging matter to impute the conduct of an individual or individuals to a broader group, and I think, in my opinion, and using my lawyer hat, this is a good progression towards a policy that's going to be easier to apply and perhaps easier to interpret. My only question for you before seeing if the board has any at this point would be, I think you said at the opening that you've gotten good feedback from a representative slice of student groups, from a lot, or is it at this point not where you at in feedback?
Oh, Chair McMillan, at this point, the feedback that went into this language wasn't from students, it was from staff at each campus who's involved in the student conduct process in groups.
All right. And at this point, then, going forward, we would be looking for feedback from student groups, perhaps, about this, or not?
Yes, I mean, we'd welcome any feedback. I mean, I have recently received, I saw some feedback from a graduate student group that we would consider, and would consider anything from the university community.
Good. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Counsel Slavitt, and you may not know this answer, but what is the interface between the student athlete handbook code and this student conduct code? In other words, athletes, unlike any other students, are dealing with a couple sets of rules here, and obviously the student athlete codes are relate heavily to the NCAA requirements, but are behavior issues, do they reference back to this student code, or do they have their own? And how is a player, an athlete, how do they pivot between these two worlds, these two criteria?
Counsel Slavitt.
Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson. Sure. Well, the student conduct code applies to all students, whether they're in a football player, a basketball player, or in any student group, it applies. The student group language does not apply to the athletic department teams. Those are not student groups. So what we're talking about here are registered student organizations, not, the tennis team, etc. The student athlete code of conduct applies to all student athletes. That is in addition to the student conduct code. So all students, student conduct code, student athletes conduct code, and the student athlete code of conduct. Only registered student groups with respect to this language that we're adding to the conduct code.
Follow up, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Counsel Slavitt. I do understand that, but in terms of what's inside the student athlete rule book or code, can these be confusing to an athlete? Are they given both that and the student conduct code, and just one sort of dominate the other in terms of the
Counsel Slavitt?
You don't know. That's fine. I just
So Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson, I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question before. That's hard for me. I guess I would answer, I don't know. The athletic department, how they train on the student athlete code of conduct, I'm not aware of that.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. One question for you. Thank you for this presentation. I think it's good, a good improvement. I do have some questions as to what exactly is a student group, and you just mentioned registered student group, but I can think of an example for, let's say we have a politically oriented group operating on campus that isn't registered, and obviously registered student groups, because of the way we've handled this in the past, only tell you, or only have to tell you, I think, who their officers are in the registration process. And so if you have, so there's kind of two questions. One is, how do we treat a registered student group? And then how do we treat a group that operates together, maybe on social media, and they're not registered?
Counsel Slavitt.
Chair McMillan, Regent Hsu. Well, I guess the way I'll answer that is, the conduct code applies to registered student groups only. I mean, so if there's a collection of students who are just gathered to do something, they would still be individually, the conduct code would still apply to them as individuals, but the university would have no authority to do anything to the group as a whole. Because essentially, if the group's not registered, there's nothing the university can do to a group. We can't affect their status or suspend them or put them on probation or require them to do anything.
Okay. Follow-up, Regent Chu, one more.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. So in the case of a registered student group, then I just want to make sure that we're fair and we don't hold people accountable for things if they're not involved actually in the activity that's in question. And then it brings up all sorts of questions as to whether or not an intramural team is considered a registered student organization. But I don't think so, because they wouldn't register. They would register with the intramural department, wherever that is, but they wouldn't necessarily have to register their team as an organization. Is that correct?
Deputy Counsel Slavin.
Chair McMillan, Regent Chu, I don't know how intramural sports teams register. I don't think they'd have to register as a registered student group.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That item is for review between now and February. Council, we're grateful for your work here, and as I said at the opening, I think continually improving these challenging areas of making policy better is a full-time job. Now, for the interest of our stakeholders in the audience, we had planned a lunch break. We're going to take a 25-minute lunch break now, which I would like to be back here by 12:30. At that point, we're going to ask Senior Vice President Burnett and Vice President Volna to make an abbreviated and quick summary of the financial report, and then we have additional business reporting back from the committee. So 12:30 sharp back here, and lunch for the board is immediately behind us. So. All right, we're going to reconvene. We don't have to gavel back in formally because we didn't adjourn the meeting of the board, but we have the annual financial report, and Associate Vice President Volna is here, and he's going to do an abbreviated but still important conversation. And here comes Senior Vice President Burnett. Is he opening, or are you?
I'm going to open.
All right.
I thought I'd see you all go this way by.
That's okay.
My apologies.
We snuck in the back door.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Burnett, I turn it over to you. I don't believe the President has any introductory comments here, and we'll appreciate brevity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Today we're pleased to present the audited fiscal year 2017 financial report. As you know, our balance sheet and income statement were significantly impacted from the GASB 68 impact of state changes in our pension assumptions, in the MSRS pension assumptions to be specific. Despite that, the university continues to have a strong financial foundation with excellent credit quality. Moody's were AA1 and S&P has us as AA and both stable, AA stable. And in fact, if you back out the GASB impacts, the 2017 results are slightly stronger than 2016's results. So in the next few slides, we will review the 2017 financial statement highlights. We will also have some additional insights on the GASB 68 effect quickly, including actions we are now taking to be more engaged and proactive with the state regarding MSRS. So I'm going to turn it over to Assistant CFO Mike Volna to walk through these in a quick and fashion.
Chair McMillan, members of the committee, thank you very much. So basically, thanks. Basically, we'll start with the overview of the balance sheet. I know they don't call it the balance sheet in the financial statements, but that's what it is the balance sheet. As you can see, in terms of total assets, we were very, very flat compared to last year. In terms of the overall liabilities, you can see the huge jump, and again, as Senior Vice President Burnett indicated, that really reflects the accrual of the big liability related to the GASB pension on the MSRS. Looking a little bit more closely at the balance sheet, the assets, very stable, a little bit of fluctuation between categories, but overall a 1.2% increase in assets. In terms of liabilities, again, that $1,653 million hit on the liabilities related to accruing the MSRS pension liability. If you look at long-term debt, we actually had a slight decrease in debt because we pay off about $88 million a year, $85 to $88 million a year in debt, so we have a very short and fast turnaround on those.
Vice President Volna, I'm going to interrupt you just long enough to check on our online or our telephonic participation. We heard a beep.
Hi, Regent Simmons, I'm on.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Simmons. I don't hear from Regent Omari, so we'll assume it's just Regent Simmons. Thank you, and back to you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Not a problem. This slide just gives a little 10-year picture of net position, which is sort of the equivalent of shareholders' equity and retained earnings in the corporate world. You can see we've color-coded it to reflect the colors of money, green being unrestricted, yellow being restricted, expendable, and the reds really reflecting restricted and non-expendable types of activities. Talk more about it in a few minutes, but you can see the dip down starting in 2015 reflects when we had to begin accruing the GASB pension liabilities. The second primary statement in your financial statements is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. At a very high level, you can see we always have to show this odd thing called net operating loss. It's a GASB requirement. This year, we actually took a $330 million hit, as I believe I indicated in a memo to you, related to the GASB pension adjustments that were made by the state. If you were to actually back those out, we would actually look very comparable and slightly above where we ended up last year. So that GASB impact had a pretty big hit to the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes. Next slide just shows you the revenue side, total revenues. This is operating and non-operating. We differentiate them up in the right-hand corner between what's operating and what's non-operating. This slide gives you total operating expenses. You may look at it and say, why did we have $3.5 billion in revenues and $3.7 billion in operating expenses? Again, keep in mind it's that $330 million pension expense for the adjustments that were made by the state. That all flows into your operating side. This is a 6-year trend of the expenses by functional classification. Instruction, research, public service, and what have you. You can see for the last 3 years we've seen a bit of an uptick, and this past year quite a hockey stick up, and again that relates to those GASB adjustments. So let's just talk for a minute about that GASB pension effect. We took a $1,664 million hit to liabilities. We took a $330.5 million hit on the expense side. The state, as I had indicated in my memo to you, the state made a number of changes to their actuarial assumptions, which generated a downward draft in the way their actuaries calculated it. Once they hit a point, I believe it was 2042 in their projections, they had to shift to an incredibly low 2.8% expected return rate using a risk-free return on municipal debt, which just completely drives down your assumptions about what the assets are that are available. And that really is what drove this big hit. I don't understand, as an aside, I don't understand why you would switch to a risk-free instrument because of your expected rates. I think that's a faulty assumption, but that is the methodology that GASB requires, and so that's what we saw. If you look at our net position with and without that, you can see actually that we would have a very healthy unrestricted and restricted expendable. We still have a healthy net position, but this is the kind of slide and this is the kind of explanation that we work with our rating agencies on so that they understand all of this is really GASB impacted and this is really the state's pension liability. So to help us get a better sense of what's going on with those pension liabilities, we've got a plan that we're working on now that involves getting a better understanding of how they make their assumptions and what their governance model is. We want to engage with the state more so that we have better understanding and quicker timing. We didn't find out about these things till about a week before you guys got the memo. And ideally what we'd like to do is be able to actually have a voice at the table and influence how they think about the state's the university's portion of those state liabilities. The last primary statement that you find in your financial statements is a statement of cash flows. We typically like to show it this way just so you can see the outflows of cash and the inflows of cash. We did have a slight negative cash flow this year, and it's primarily generated by the timing of when we issue debt, what cash we have, and what projects we spend it on. And because of the big projects we had going this past year, we had a slight negative cash flow. I'm not concerned about it because on an operating basis, we look fine. We have two discreetly presented units, the University of Minnesota Foundation and the University of Minnesota Physicians. They're significant enough, and because of their relationship to us, we report them as standalone separate entities in the financial statements. You all know quite a bit about them. This is just a brief snapshot of their assets and their liabilities, revenues, and expenses.
So, in summary, our finances continue to be strong and prudently managed, as reflected in the financial results that we actually had something to do with as management. I think also to remind assurance to the board, we have an unqualified opinion from Deloitte on our financial statements. There's also the absence of any findings on our federal single audit, which from a compliance perspective, hopefully the board takes great pride in the work we've done. And our excellent credit rating resulted earlier this year with a very low cost of capital. We had about a 275 weighted average cost of capital to refinance and issue new debt. Has reflected that we're one of the strong credits in the credit market, and we're happy to take any questions, but understand we are going to do our very best to try and be more proactive around this pension piece that comes our way with a portion of the university's employees, and hopefully mitigate those impacts to our balance sheet in the future. With that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to take any questions from you or members of the board.
Thank you, and Regent Cohen may be noting this later in her report, but it was we did have at the Audit Committee, Audit and Compliance, a great interaction with Deloitte, and they're very complimentary of the interface with Vice President Volna and his team. So I just note that for the rest of the board. That's very, very helpful. So questions over there, Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just a quick one for Vice President Volna. What form, if we were to get a voice at the table, and I agree with you that that's a good thing to pursue, what would we be looking for? How might that play out?
Chair McMillan, Regent Powell, so there are two pension plans that that our employees are covered by. One is para, and that's like 63 employees in the police and fire plan, and then there are about 8,900 that are in MSRS. What ideally we would want is an opportunity to have some sort of seat at their governance table, so that we have an opportunity to talk to them not only about what they're seeing for all of the state retirement plan, but our employees that are in that, because we've always felt that our employees represent a pretty stable pension risk for them, and so having the opportunity to talk about the university's story as a participant in there, I think is what we'd be looking for.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
Chair. So is that something that we would ask our legislative team to advocate for on our behalf, or is it?
Chair McMillan, Regent Powell, I think at this point we're trying to get a better understanding of the governance model that they have. There are some appointees that are retirees and such, so we have to kind of explore through what process we would have to go through to learn a little bit more about how we'd get that seat at the table. We can come back and explain to you better, maybe in a semi-annual controller's report or something, what we've learned and where we're landing on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, Vice President Volna, I'm assuming that smart people exist at the state too, and that these actuarial assumptions were not made without thought, without foresight, without understanding there would be some consequences. Maybe concerns about what happens in Illinois with their pension plan, or California, both out of, I don't know how they're ever going to get out of it. They're so deep in a hole. Give me the other side of the story. Why were these economic assumptions made? Not just the consequence to us, but why the economic assumption of the, what did you say, 2.1% as opposed to maybe 6% where you'd get on your money? There was a reason.
Yes. Chair McMillan, Regent Swigum, I don't mean to imply that the decisions that have been made are bad decisions or that they didn't follow the appropriate policies or accounting rules. For me, it's about being able to have a better understanding of the choices they're making, because when you look at the multitude of actuarial assumptions that they actually have to make choices on, there are shades of gray. I would also say it's about getting insight into the decisions faster. As I said, we found out about this within a week of our issuing the financial statements, and to me that's unacceptable. We should be getting information and there should be more transparency around this weeks or months ahead of time. But they do this actually based on the prior year's beginning numbers, so they should know this months ahead of time, and so that's a part of it for me as well.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll speak with you about it later.
Okay, thank you.
I know with economic assumptions, you change a percent or two, you can show it really great or really bad or really rosy situations, and I'm assuming that's what Chicago and California got into to create their problems some years ago, is they created economic assumptions that couldn't be met and gave benefits that they couldn't afford based on those assumptions.
Regent Swigum, my bet is that Illinois' assumptions are good, their funding is bad. They're not paying into their pension plans.
Well, I think that's true, but it's because of the assumptions that they could sell it and they could make those decisions.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for the report. And while you folks are moving on, we're going to go to the committee reports, and there's action items in mission fulfillment and finance and operations, and reports from the other three without action items. And first of all, I want to double check. I think by prior arrangement, Vice Chair of Mission Fulfillment, Regent Simmons, is going to provide that report, but I want to be sure because we don't have them before us. I'm hearing the phone blink on and off, so. Regent Simmons or Omari.
Yes.
Very good. I think I heard you, Regent Simmons. Are you prepared to provide the report and the action item coming out of yesterday's Mission Fulfillment Committee?
I'm very happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I got disconnected. The Mission Fulfillment Committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes changes in programs and tenure. I move approval.
Motion's before us and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Regent Omari, did I hear you as well?
Yes.
Very good. And you're okay with Regent Simmons, your vice chair, continuing to deliver the report?
That was the plan because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to join. So
Thank
absolutely.
you. All right, back to you, Regent Simmons. That first item on the consent, that's been approved.
Thank you. That concludes my report, Chair McMillan.
All right. And thank you, both of you, committee leadership, for what I thought was an excellent and probing conversation and around a couple of key topics yesterday. You heard me raise those in my remarks this morning. On to audit and compliance. Regent Cohen.
Yes, thanks, Chair McMillan. The Audit and Compliance Committee had no action items this month. The discussion items, there were four. First, we heard an update on the audit of the Twin Cities Undergraduate Admissions Office, and the internal audit had issued a report with several essential audit findings. Provost Hanson and Vice Provost McMaster reported to the committee on the specific recommendations the audit identified, many of which have already been implemented. We continued our discussion on the institutional risk profile. Provost Hanson and Senior Vice President Burnett presented a draft profile that illustrates 20 risks facing the university. I encourage you all to review the docket materials on this item. The committee will continue discussing these risks and risk mitigation at our February meeting. The Chief Compliance Officer, Coomer, provided an update on the university's compliance initiatives, including new procedures for conducting investigations from reports received through U-Report, the university's anonymous reporting service. We also received the audit results from the fiscal year 2017 annual financial statements from Deloitte, our independent auditor. I'm pleased to report that they had no findings and the university was issued a clean audit. In our final item, Assistant Controller Paulson reported on the university's compliance with the state statute related to small business procurement. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Beeson, litigation review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Litigation Review Committee did meet yesterday, and at the meeting, the committee adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss a number of matters subject to attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report.
Thank you. And on to Regent Anderson with our Finance and Operations Committee, which also had a hefty agenda.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. The Finance and Operations Committee considered 5 action items yesterday. The committee voted to recommend approval of the resolution related to the fiscal year 2019 Twin Cities undergraduate non-resident non-reciprocity tuition rate. I move approval of this resolution.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Second item was the committee voted unanimously to recommend.
Hold it. I'm sorry. This is yes, Regent Omari. Did you oppose that?
I was attempting to, but I didn't know that you were calling, or I didn't hear you call for it.
I'm sorry that it was moved and seconded, and then we voted. And did you vote in the?
I just want to note, I'm voting in the negative.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Regent Lucas as well.
And Regent Cohen also.
3 votes in the negative. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to do a drive-by there. Back to you, Regent Anderson. Thank you.
It's my fault. We got to just pause a little bit because of the delay.
Yeah.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the amendments to the University of Minnesota Faculty Retirement Plan. I move approval of those amendments.
Second. That's been moved and seconded on the faculty retirement plans. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with AFSCME Locals 3937 and 3801 technical employees. I move approval of this resolution.
Very good. Moved and seconded. Discussion on this union contract. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the amendment to the fiscal year 2018 annual capital improvement budget related to the golf practice facility on the Twin Cities campus. I move approval of the capital budget amendment.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on this item. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? And your last action item, Regent Anderson.
The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the revised consent report, which includes the Central Reserve's contingency allocations, the purchase of goods and services $1 million and over, the appointment of Dr. Jacob Tolar as Dean of the Medical School, the First Amendment and Second Amendment to the employment agreement for the head football coach, Twin Cities campus, PJ Fleck, off-cycle tuition rates, and amendments to the civil service rules. I move approval of the consent report.
Second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Of course, there's quite a few items in there, so is there discussion on any individual items or anyone that would like to not take those as a group? Hearing none and waiting for a little longer for our remote callers. All right. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Regent Anderson. Does that conclude your report?
I think so. Let me look. Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and to Regents Omari and what did I miss? Okay. Jeez. Well, that was because it was just this morning, and it was so well run, and so prudently debated that I've forgotten we had a committee meeting this morning. I'm getting trouble with my own structure here. Regent Rocha, my apologies to you and your vice chair for moving too quick.
It will be so
Governance and Policy.
So worth it, Mr. Chair. The Governance and Policy Committee did not consider any action items this month, so I'd like to use the balance of my time. Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
Very good. Is there any old business to come before the board? Any old business? All right, now we move on to new business, and before I address one that I'd like to introduce, I'll ask if there's any other new business of which I'm unaware that anyone would like to raise.
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Johnson.
Very briefly, reading earlier this morning the Wilmer paper and to call attention to Dr. Wally Nelson, longtime employee of the University of Minnesota. He's a superintendent at Lamberton for, I believe, 34 years, and he passed away yesterday at age 89, and I just thought appropriate that we recognize Wally Nelson simply here at the Regents. He married 68 years. His wife is still living. His daughter and son-in-law live in Wilmer. His son-in-law is a doctor in Wilmer. I know them well, but had occasion to be with Wally a number of times. He is also the recipient of the SEAL Award, prestigious agricultural award here at the university. So just wanted to recognize that, Mr. Chairman and members of the board.
Sounds like a life well led and well serving of the university. Any other new business? All right, I would now ask our Executive Director, Mr. Steves, to read a resolution, and then I'd entertain a motion to adopt it.
Regents of the University of Minnesota resolution to conduct non-public meeting of the Board of Regents to discuss attorney-client privilege matters. Whereas, based on the advice of the General Counsel, the Board of Regents has balanced the purposes served by the open meeting law and by the attorney-client privilege and determined that there is a need for absolute confidentiality to discuss particular matters involving the University of Minnesota. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.01 Subdivision 3 and 13D.05 Subdivision 3B, the remainder of this Board of Regents meeting will be non-public for the purpose of discussing attorney-client privilege matters related to potential litigation involving non-public educational data.
Is there a motion to adopt that resolution?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Regent Powell, and a second. Thank you, Regent Lucas. Discussion. Right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I abstain.
All right, we need to clear the room of all but council. Yes, and we'll